Welcome back to Madame Tortuga's Lounge with your host, the neurodivergent, mentally ill, non-binary, polypan, pagan Pisces, Dottie the Psychic, a Metro Valley Pagan Pride affiliate. Hello, my Dotlings, and welcome to another episode of Shameless Self-Promotion with Dottie the Psychic and then you introduce yourself.
I'm Jasmine. Nice to be here.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that I do that because I'm so bad at pronouncing names. Like not even just ethnic names. Like I have called many a Jessica Jean in my life. You know what I mean? Like I've messed up too many names to do that like on screen. Like this. That was one of the first things, like, never, ever have I tried, like, there's very few people. I will introduce, like, a few people that I know personally, but, like, it's gone so wrong. Just, like,
Introductions are always just hard, anyway. Like,
right.
Anytime I'm in, like, a social group and it comes time to where we have to sit in a circle and say our name and one fun fact about us, I literally forget who the hell I am. Like, I don't even know her. Like,
who is she?
Yeah.
You know what, though? That is one thing I don't have any problem with anymore, but I realized, like, I have built up this Dottie the Psychic persona that I can't take off anymore. Like, it is very much who I am. Which is, it makes it interesting. Like, it was like an excuse to be neurodivergent in public. Like, I'm not being weird, I'm being spectacular.
Yeah.
And it works for me. It's my excuse to be extra. Like, you catch me in stimming in public, well, I'm Dottie the Psychic. Of course, I'm a little bit strange.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about I'm sorry. I've been spacey for a while now. I'm not gonna lie about it.
Me too.
So Jasmine here,
Jasmine. Yeah.
Jasmine, is an author. And actually you reached out to me, which I was really, really excited about because like I'm still a pretty small channel. So to have somebody reach out to me really, really like made my day. And not only that, but you had to go through the Forgotten Labyrinth, through Instagram, through my Facebook business page
But we got there.
Finally to be able to communicate properly because I'd set up all of these auto comments because I didn't get anybody. Like, I'm like, oh, here's all my information. Those have been set up for literal years. I turned them off finally, like, because nobody reaches out through business pages, I guess, because I'll be perfectly honest. I have not really gotten a whole lot of responses when I have reached out to other businesses through their Facebook pages. I'm like, okay, well, at least it's not just me. But I really appreciate that. And you sent me a copy of the Witch's Flight book.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what is the Witch's Flight about? Witch's Flight.
So I think I had originally kind of came across how do I want to say, like, you kind of came into my sphere, if you will, I think through Blue Night, like, and like Drunken Divinations and everything. I think that's how you kind of came into my sphere, and I watched some of your content, and I just, like, I'm in Indiana, and I don't know if you say where you are or not, but we're really not that far. Yeah. We're really not that far away from each other.
I figured everybody could just tell by the accent where I was from, honestly.
And even though like we're in different states, like there's kind of a similar current that I feel like that runs through Appalachia, and Indiana technically borders Appalachia. Like, we're not considered part of it. Right. But I definitely think that especially in southern Indiana, you know, we border Kentucky and Ohio. Like, we still get some energetic, magical runoff. And also, like, there are gorgeous parts of West Virginia. I went out there with some friends to, like, the Mothman bit, and that was really, really fun.
That
Um,
doesn't. Oh, gotta tell you. Go ahead and tell about Mothman. Everybody knows about Mothman and all of our cryptids because the mountains, man. I tell you what,
yeah,
they've got an energy all of their
yes.
own.
Yeah, and I can feel it from Indiana. Like,
Yeah.
so that's kind of why I had reached out. Also, like I am a initiated practicing witch within a American traditional folkloric witchcraft tradition. And I think it's really cool to see like more American witches kind of working more with the land that we are on here, working more locally, working with community locally.
Right.
And that's what I had seen from you. And so that's why I was like, oh, let me see if maybe they would be interested in some of my work because I am a self-published author and that's what we do. Like,
Right.
like, and to me, I'll talk a little bit about how I got into writing this book, but like, I'm a hairstylist. Okay. So when this came into my world of, oh, I'm going to write this book, like I had no intention or no plan to even write a book, let alone I now have self-published 3 books. I'm working on my 4th, which is exciting. But the book that I had sent was Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight, which is this. This is the hard copy version. It also comes in paperback.
I
Um,
love that though. I love a hard copy book.
I know, me too.
It's classy. It's a little classy. It reminds me of some of the nicer old school witch books, the ones that were a little pricey.
Yeah. Yeah. And also it just like it looks good on the shelf,
Mm,
Like I mean, I love me a good paperback too, but like I'm such like a lover of book corn.
aesthetic.
Like
Yeah.
you have really nice looking shelves, but also I kind of like the Chaos Goblin Maximalist bookshelves where they kind of look like they could fall apart at any moment. Like where like the shelves look like they're kind of bowing from the weight of the books and like
Love my living room. It's a
I'm into
mess.
that. I'm into that. So Witchflight. So Witchflight is a trad witch's way of essentially it's also sometimes called spirit flight. Um, Witchflight, I prefer that terminology. I feel like it tastes better in my mouth when I use those words versus saying like shamanic journeying. That doesn't really feel right to me personally.
Or
And I
astral
don't know if that's
projection.
really, yeah, an astral projection. Like astral projection to me feels very new age. And if chakras and crystals and working with Saint Michael is your bit, what do you say? Like, blessed be and more profit to you or whatever. Like, good for you. You know what I
Safe
mean?
travel and much profit to you.
Yeah. Safe travels, much profit to you, whatever. I'm an occultist and I resonate more with the traditional witchcraft sort of current. So calling it shamanic journeying just does not, I'm not a shaman,
Right.
I'm not going to pretend to be. And calling it astral travel just feels kind of more new agey to me.
Right.
And I feel like spirit flight or even witch flight as the term that I use. And I didn't invent this term either. Like these are just words that are out there. Just feels more right to me.
Right.
So to kind of start with, like how this book kind of came about, because it's important for like the rest of the story. This book was born out of a compact that I had with an otherworldly spirit. So, a little bit of information about me. Here locally in the Circle City, which is what Indianapolis is called, our state's capital where I live, I run a coven called the Solar Court Coven, and I serve this coven as the High Priestess, and we do XYZ throughout the year. Well, at one of our yearly rituals, it involves summoning the devil, pacting with spirits, and basically being assigned a business partner. Okay. So part of the ritual involves our witch's devil assigning us a spirit to work with as a working familiar. A familiar, for anyone watching, basically being a sort of spirit ally, an otherworldly spirit ally. And traditional witches tend to have an array of familiars, or their fetch spirit, or there's also a term that we use, it's spirit court, kind of like my spirit guides. similar kind of concept, but like that trad witch flavor. You know what I mean?
Right.
Not like some random, you know,
we'll
Cherokee.
get into that.
Right.
We're gonna do a whole a big part of this conversation is going to be about like, because I know you have like issues with some of the like the new age community.
Yeah.
And also like I got the video you sent me of the lady who was like, this is not what pagans do. And
and also like I didn't even call myself that.
Right.
So you called me that. I said I was a traditional witch. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like talking about that. But so, okay. So in this particular ritual, right? Everything's good. The devil comes to our Sabbath, and I'm assigned Owl as my familiar. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to work with like the hellish Prince Stolas, because he's been a demon that I've worked with before, especially for learning, education, teaching. He's a wonderful infernal ally, Prince Stolas. So I was thinking maybe I'd be working with him, or maybe I'd be working with one of the Lalitu, like one of Lilith's spirits, because she's associated with the Screech Owl, and I very much hold veneration for her. No, it was actually neither of these spirits. So after this ritual, we go on a fly out where we fly to the other world and we interact with otherworldly spirits through Witchflight. And I met this spirit. There's a whole chapter in the book. It's called Owl Woman. There's a whole chapter in the book about what that looked like. But basically, our business dealing for that year was, my end of this business deal was to write this book. She was like, oh, you're going to write this book about Witchflight. And I was kind of like, I don't know, girl. I'm not really an author. Like, I cut hair. Like, you want me to write a book? I don't know, babe. I don't know if I don't even know how. Like, she was like, well, you're going to figure it out. She was very like Queen of Swords with me. And she was like, direct. She basically made me feel like in order to serve my community, my coven, our clanad, our tradition of our witches, there needs to be more literature out there that, one, is based in UPG, which stands for Unverified Personal Gnosis, for anyone who might not know, because there's a dozen and more like Witchcraft 101 beginner books, you know? Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. I think that's great. And those are needed, but also I did not feel like that was really a space I needed to occupy, because there's already so many great ones out there. I mean, I personally, for traditional witchcraft, would say George Hares's work, The Ineffable Name, or Keldon Mercury's book, The Crooked Path, or Jake Richards' book, Backwoods Witchcraft. Those are all very in line with what I would recommend to someone who's starting out their path as a traditional folkloric witch. Because those books, I feel like, really speak to that sort of current. But anyway, also, if you go on Amazon, or you go on Half Price Books, or you go anywhere that books are sold, any metaphysical section, occult section, you might find some material out there on astral travel. Most of it was probably written in the 90s. There's not a whole lot of new material out there specifically on spirit flight or witch flight. You're going to find astral travel, and it's also going to be written very much more so from like a new age perspective, not really a trad witch perspective, right? Like the traditional folklore of witches using baby's fat and flying ointments and flying out to the witch's Sabbath. You're not going to find that in the astral travel books, you know? Right.
It's definitely more, it's like cleaned up. It is
different.
More meditative. It's
more
meditative,
and for those that have experienced that and have looked into that and have tried to find that, you will know. Also, another caveat is my book is kind of split into a couple sections, but it's also really not a Witchflight 101 book. Like Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight is not going to be, hey, this is Witchflight and this is how you do it. It's mostly my own personal experiences. Again, it's UPG. So that's kind of another thing that I think is a really big gap in our witchy academic sort of world, is that we don't have
a lot of adult books.
We don't have a lot of material out there that's like, this is astral travel. We'll use that term for this. Here's astral travel, and here's what you experience. Like, it's all about, here's how you pull your spirit from your body, but then it just stops there. And there's not a
Yeah.
whole lot of people actually sharing their lived experience of what it is. I think for a numerous amount of reasons, like I think some people are nervous of feeling invalidated by sharing something so intimate and sacred. I think some people also just feel like it's not to be shared, that it's a personal thing.
Right.
But I felt very much tasked with it. So the book starts off with kind of exploring what Witchflight is and just some general basics about it. Like I talk about aphantasia and like different things that might cause issues, because like we witches are all blessed with various different strengths and weaknesses. Just like
Right.
there are some really good witches out there that can, you know, conjure up spirits and XYZ. There are some great like divination witches out there. There are witches out there that really know their herbs. Like,
Right.
not every witch is necessarily going to be a flyer. Like, and controversial hot take, like that's okay. You know, if
Right.
it's not
Right.
working for you, that's okay. But also, you're not going to try this practice for the first time and have an insanely vivid, like cinematic movie like LSD trip experience either. Like, and it's something that's a practice. It requires consistent effort to be able to perform it. So, and then there's journal entries about spirits that I have met in the other world through Witchflight, like the Witches' Council. There's a whole chapter on them. They've been very influential in our coven. Um, and then I also wrote, there's a section in there that's a spirit codex. And in the first book, there's a codex in here. It has 86 spirits. And I took kind of some inspiration from the Legamenton, the Lesser Keys of Solomon. So for those who might be familiar with like Solomonic sorcery, there is the Testament of Solomon, which is like Solomon's story. Then there is the Lesser Key, which contains information regarding the Legion of the 72 Infernals. And then the Greater Key is a book of rituals. And so I kind of took inspiration from that grimoire format. So this is kind of like Jasmyne's testament, if you will, of my experience with Witchflight, kind of an intro to my spirit codex. And then I do include some personal recipes in here as well, like how to make a witch's whiskey, how to make a Sabbath wine, how to make a flying ointment, also how to make a non-toxic flying ointment. Also, allegedly and for entertainment purposes, how to work with other things like datura, you know, among and other things that are listed in there that may or may not be okay in your state, depending on where you live. So yeah.
I will say that
Um,
that was a pretty long list of, and because I've never really seen a good list of astral travel ointments. It's usually because it's almost like, I think the New Age, as a lot of people do come at this from a New Age perspective, but they
yeah.
do tend to be almost strictly meditative
Yeah.
rather than like sort of preparing the body. That was one thing I did notice, because I read some of the book. Y'all know that I have difficulty reading. It's funny because I write articles and things like that, but I'm hyper focused on that. And then this month we're shooting this
3 days after President Trump's inauguration. Yeah, so there's that going on. December was crazy. January's always crazy. It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah. And but it is interesting. Because I did notice very much that it was not a 101 book, because there were things I was like the Black Mirror, because I have a Black Mirror and I love my Black Mirror. And I never really thought about using it to project outward.
Yeah,
And
like mirror jumping.
Right, mirror jumping. I was like, that's interesting. And it's not really like, it's not an instructional book.
No.
That was something, because every time you kind of expect it to be a how-to.
Yeah.
But I kind of appreciate that. I appreciate the new knowledge. I'm like, but also like it. I do kind of wish you'd included a like, hey, this is how you lock down your mirror. But also like,
Well, I do have a recipe.
right.
In the
What is
back of the book, there's a mirror lock ward spray. And also some of the recipes use like Bible ash pages, which is very transgressive. That's in my mirror locking ward spray. Specifically, I believe burned pages from Leviticus and Genesis.
You know,
Yeah.
say burn Leviticus. I'm not a Bible witch. Uh, I see that it has its purpose in the world. Okay, so let's. I did what I did read. I briefly read the chapter on the spirit that you worked with, and I thought that was very interesting. And it is interesting to
The
hear
owl woman
Yeah.
one. Okay.
Yeah. It was very interesting to kind of get into this. I want to finish this book. I feel bad about not getting it done. I've had 2 months, but it's been a while, 2 months. So,
we can always do a part 2. Like, these are the thoughts now, and then maybe in the spring we come back and
I want to have you back in June for something completely different.
yeah, we can talk about that too.
Yeah. I do love that it is an easy read. Like it is not overly verbose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's actually like readable language for one. Like, don't get me wrong, I do love my poetic, overly wordy $10, you know, if you want to read that like early 1900s explanation of how all this works, which I hate to say, it was like, it seems like there was a period in the early 1900s and the late 1900s where we were getting new information, and then like not a lot in between. It seems like a lot of things other than that have been pre-digested.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of like, I feel like the Western witchcraft revival movement really took off with some very flowery Victorians that really enjoyed speaking in cursive.
Turn of the century twinks.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is what it is, and I'm not saying they're bad. Like there's a lot. I loved you know, the 90s. We're talking about the 90s. Like that was a great revival, and I loved Libernal and the Psychonaut. Like that was a great read. It was very down to earth, very instructional. It was also not a 101 book. It pretended to be for about 30 seconds in, and you're like, you know what, if you're either going to learn this stuff on your own or you're not going to learn it at all. Here's the real shit. Because I'm actually a chaot. Like, you know, we're talking about like the different kinds of practitioners, and I do love. So, okay, before we go any further, I do have to ask about the baby fat. Is this one of those like herbal things, or are we actually rendering down like lamb fat or pig fat or
right? Yeah. So there is, in traditional folkloric witchcraft, we have so much to pull from as far as like trial records and just witch lore. But I do think that it's important to keep in mind that folklorically, a lot of this is written through a very Christian lens. And so the sort of I can't even say the word, demonization is the word I'm looking for, of sort of cunning women's practices. Because, you know, cunning women could also have theoretically maybe been doing things that are, you know, current government just took rights away from, if you know what I'm talking about, with like Roe. Okay. So cunning women, witches, right, could have been performing some of those things. And the difference between being the witch or being the cunning woman was, did that baby come out okay and healthy or not? You know, these midwives, right?
Yeah.
Like they're helping deliver babies. You deliver a stillborn baby, it's obviously your fault. You're obviously a witch. You obviously killed that baby. So there's some of that, but realistically, there probably would be some fat that would be used in an ointment. And I think that it's most likely like veal or lamb, like the fat of like a baby animal versus like human. But there is witch lore around. If anyone has seen that movie, it's the Vivit with the two V's. That is very trad craft and flavor. And there's a scene in there where she crushes up fat of a baby and makes it into an ointment. And that is true to the lore. But also there's a lot of crazy lore that I don't think is meant to be interpreted literally, you know?
Right. Like frog's tongue is an actual plant.
Right.
like,
Or if you're familiar with like the grimoire, like the Picatrix or the Guy Al Hakim, there's a spell in there about, or if you're familiar with the Silver Pullet, there's a spell in there about boiling a cat alive and taking its bones and washing it in a river and making a divination set. I don't
you
think that
know
that's
what? I hate to say
literal.
that I don't know, because here's the thing. I will say that we have a different moral standard. Do I believe that somebody would take a cat, boil it alive back in the day? I do. I do,
Sure.
because I remember even watching, even when we were kids, like the cartoons, every now and then they'd have a real dark, looking back, I'm like, oh no. Like,
I mean, there's definitely something to be said about time and place. The Picatrix or the Guy Al Hakim is an Arabian grimoire. There's one spell in there that uses the blood from the neck of a wild donkey. I live in Indiana. I'm not going to find a wild donkey. And if I find a donkey at all, I'm probably going to have to trespass on someone's property first. And then also, I live in the year of our Dark Lord of 2025. That would be considered animal abuse for me to go just cut a donkey's neck and collect its blood. Like, our legal system is not going to view that,
right.
you know?
Like, how do you do,
Also,
like, are you going to go out there with a lancet and just like poke it and take like a drop? Like, maybe we can figure that out, but like,
also, why do I need to? I'm not necessarily trying to manipulate. I'm not in the Middle East right now. I am not a magi of the royal courts that are trying to manipulate kings.
right.
Like, so I'm here in the United States, in the Midwest, in the whole land.
Friend who is looking for basilisk venom. If anybody has any actual basilisk venom,
Oh, honey.
I'm just saying there's a market out there for it.
Sure.
No, but I do find this interesting because I think everybody kind of has their backstory. Like the Rosicrucians. It is interesting to take a look at the history of any given group. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of those things that it does tend to get, I don't know how to put this, like every group tends to extend their history backwards.
Yeah.
It's some great mythical legend and it's an interesting story, but even if it only started 200 years ago, but this is kind of almost the opposite direction.
Yeah.
This feels like a modern pulling together of older stories, rather than building a story backwards.
Yeah. So if we're talking about American traditional folkloric witchcraft, like specifically, if we're going to talk about that, because that does shape some of the nuance of my writing, because I am an initiate of this tradition. I am a high priestess in this tradition. I have a solitary practice as well. That's not necessarily like, not everything about my practice is like ATW. It's not all like cookie cutter, right?
I think we've all picked up, the cultural exchange of different ideas, the New Age, paganism, all this. I'm just kind of interested in what makes this different, because like you said earlier, you never claim to be a pagan. Like, right. I am a chaot, but I claim to be a pagan because I still have a pantheon. Mm-hmm. And I know that so tell us a little bit about what it means to first, because I know traditional witch is one thing. Like the traditions usually refer to like the levels that you have to go through. Like you start out as like an initiate and then you go into
like the degree system.
Yes, the degrees.
Yeah.
Do you also have that degree system, or is that?
We do.
So I think that, because that's what I think of when I think of traditional witch, and then the folklore is sort of this kind of reconstruction from these old records and stories and things of that nature.
So traditional witchcraft is definitely this umbrella, right? That primarily touches on like the UK and other parts of Europe, as well as now American traditions as well. But when people are thinking like traditional witchcraft, or at least when I think traditional witchcraft, let me not speak for all traditional witches out there because, but when I'm thinking traditional witchcraft, I'm thinking lines like Clan of the Laughing Dragon, the clan of Tubal-Cain. I'm thinking like people like Andrew Chumbley. I'm thinking of people like Robert Cochrane, who was around the same time as Gardner. They were actually notorious rivals when their magical systems and traditions were coming about. And the thing is, and I've spoke with other people in our tradition. So a little vocab, like I see tradition as like denomination. I see coven, and this is a terrible analogy, and I know that some people with Christian Abrahamic trauma are not going to like this, but to me, coven is kind of like the individual church that you might belong to. But like in our downtown district, we have like 6 different Methodist churches. And listen, their services are wildly different. But at the end of the day, they all share similar values because they're Methodist. Now, their individual worship teams might look different. So their services and the events that they offer are going to be wildly different. But they're still Methodist. Like they're distinctly Methodist. They're not Baptist. They're not Catholic, you know?
Right.
And so I think when I'm referring to tradition, and when I'm referring to my tradition, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the people of Goda. I'm talking about, again, Clan of the Laughing Dragon, Tubal-Cain, Robert Cochrane. And actually, really, we have a lot more in common with other British traditional witches and with other Wiccans like Gardnerians and Alexandrians. We have a lot more similarities to them than I would say, and this is in no way an insult, because I know that trad witches sometimes have the perception of being really up our own ass and full of ourselves, and that's true a lot. Like, but
you know what?
we
That's
have
fair.
more in common with them than we do your run-of-the-mill neo-pagan.
Neo-pagan is such a loose term. It is such a loose term, and like the new age is again like so loose of term. Like that is like essentially like almost 101 stuff.
Well, and I want to say for anyone watching, like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm like shitting on anyone when I'm talking about other traditions. And I don't want to give that impression because when I first came into craft, I started in like the new age world. I worked at a metaphysical store here in our city for 3 years. And it was a very new age shop that people came in to buy their white sage bundles and, you know, buy their Archangel Michael statues and buy their chakra crystals and their chakra tapestries. Like I worked there, I grew in that environment. Like that was kind of, I would say that was, I have a good amount of folk magic in my familial background, like earth-based folk magic practices. Most of the people in my family would definitely not, like, I'm not saying that they're witches, because like they wouldn't call themselves witches.
No.
But
well,
some
I mean,
of
that
the
was a
stuff
pejorative until like almost modern day. And even now I hear people like, oh, she's such a witch. I'm like, I'm a witch. Well, we didn't mean it like that.
Right. So I think that my time in sort of the new age world, like, and I'm talking about concepts like working with ascended masters and the angels and the purifying white light and, you know, all that bit, right? Kind of pushed me more into craft because it just never really felt like it clicked for me. And you know what?
It's very right hand. That's the thing.
If rose quartz fits you, then great. You know, it just wasn't for me. So then I was a pretty eclectic Wiccan specifically for quite a while. And then that just never really fit with me either. And I think a large part of that is because, and here's another hot take. Wicca is also an initiatory tradition. And I think the reason why a lot of times solitary witches that are eclectic feels like their practice sometimes falls flat or they don't feel like they're going anywhere with it is it's because originally it was an initiatory system.
The thing is telling me to raise my hand. I don't know if I have interrupted you so often that the Google Meets is telling me to like be polite or what, but it did. It said raise your hand. Like,
oh, I don't know.
So I do think this is actually really interesting because I've never really heard. I had done I did an interview with Lorelei Black.
Yeah.
A while ago now, and it was an interesting interview, but we had all sorts of crazy static. Like, it was very difficult to do the live stream. But it was interesting, and I think that was the first time I'd heard about this trad witch, American folkloric trad witchery.
I know it's a lot. Like I
It's a
usually just say
mouthful.
ATW, like just
ATW.
because it's a lot. Yeah.
You know what, though? I kind of understand why it is, though, because it certainly is, and I can see where it is a legitimate branch, and I can definitely see, because usually, I hate to say this, a lot of times New Age practice just kind of permeates everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I think everybody who's into magical practice has a tendency to use bits of it, but to actually speak of it as a separate practice is kind of interesting, because there are plenty of practitioners who will stay on that like light path,
Mm-hmm.
and it is very right hand. And I do notice that they tend to be defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Put it diplomatically.
Mm-hmm.
Defensive, and that there is a certain level of not animosity, because that's not really fair, but a little bit of derision, because they do tend to be like they're trying to ascend, to be closer to God, to be love and light, to be
Mm-hmm.
it's a right hand path.
Right.
So to
To
take that
destroy the ego, to be one with the divine, to work as a collective source-based energy. Yeah.
right,
Versus the left-hand path initially, which the right and left-hand paths do come from Hinduism. And then Madame
right.
Blavatsky, who was a real piece of work, who wrote
Oh
the
my
secret doctrine and the
God.
root race theory, because this is where the New Age movement comes from. It comes
Oh,
from a lot of theosophy, and it comes from, here's the truth, white
the same.
supremacy.
Yeah, well,
Is
I
what
mean, okay, so theosophy is like the root of New Age practice, but also it's the same root of like neo-Nazis.
right. And
Like,
so this is
that's
why
how
there
they got
is
the swastika.
this is why there is a recognizable pipeline between New Age, the New Age movement, and the alt-right pipeline. Like it's a
I
real
have
thing.
noticed that is something I will say I've noticed. Now, this is not across the board, because I certainly do know people who are left-hand path that there's a pipeline over there
Oh
too.
yeah, there
Like,
is.
let's
If
not
you go
pretend like
too
it's not.
far one way or the other, it takes you to
Right.
the same place.
It's
Interesting.
almost like the extremism. But I do notice like the people who go left-hand path seem to be more also leftist.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. Like they tend to be like, if you're more willing to get and if you're willing to work with dirt.
Right. Left-hand path is, instead of destroying the ego, it's about uplifting the ego and exalting the ego. So instead of
Right.
us destroying, part of our ego as something shameful so that we can be closer to God, the left-hand path encourages us to actually follow what's called the path of apotheosis, which
And
is
become God.
exalting the ego to God, to recognize yourself as a
Right.
living God. Where that goes really weird sometimes is that there are people that take that in the direction that I am God.
Oh
Like,
yeah, no, there's
in a
definitely
singular form, and that they fail to recognize that, okay, with apotheosis, me recognizing myself as a living divine being does not in any way grant me authority to subjugate the lives of others, like,
right.
because we
Yeah,
should be working this apotheosis. And I will also say too, there's
it's
a
not a
lot.
license to be a sociopath.
Right. And there is a lot of the Luciferians, specifically that branch of Satanism. There's a lot of that current in ATW. There's also a lot of Thelema. There's also a fair amount of Wicca. Like the Gardnerians and the Alexandrians are basically our magical cousins. They look at us as like
Right.
the weird redheaded stepchildren of the family because we're these
Right.
crazy Americans over
And
here.
because you work with the devil and they just can't. They just
No,
can't
but they work
handle
with the
it.
horned god.
I
Our
know.
folkloric devil and their horned god are not that different. Hot take, not that different. And also they feel like we are very patriarchal and like more masculine focused, because in traditional witchcraft there is a lot of influence on the folkloric devil or the witch's devil, but that does not mean that we don't also recognize a divine feminine like figure like Gardnerians and Alexandrians do, because we do. And I can talk about that too, but American traditional witchcraft has the ceremonial magic elements of the Victorians, but also because it's come to America, and this magical system was birthed from primarily Appalachia, like for real.
Right.
So we have an
And New England.
intermixing of folk magic from all of these different peoples. Now, am I saying that I feel like that gives me the license to say I'm a hoodoo practitioner? No, I'm not saying that. Am I saying that that gives me the license to say, oh, I practice Appalachian conjure? No, I don't think that either. But we have those threads that have intermixed within what is recognizably different from what's going on across the pond, because our genus loci, the land that we are on, greatly shapes our practice. And of course, America also, and I think this is important to touch on considering we just had the Trump inauguration, American history is horrific, brutal, and this country was built on the suffering of humanity, like the country that we know of today, with the subjugation of Native Americans and the enslavement of human lives. And those themes are still in this country now. Whether or not that makes you uncomfortable, whether or not that makes you defensive, that is the truth of the matter. And if people are not seeing that after we literally had a whole Swazi, whatever moment up there in front of millions of people all around the world, baby, if that's not what he did, and if he felt bad about doing that, it's 3 days now. He would have said something. He owns one of the largest social media platforms. He could address the public and say, oh, that's not what I meant. He meant exactly what he did. And this is America. And so also that makes people really uncomfortable about American traditional witchcraft, right? Because there is so much pain and heartache and suffering that is interwoven into this tradition that they also don't have nearly in the same capacity across the pond. So when people come to ATW, how do I connect with this land, especially as white people? How am I going to connect with this land in a way that honors it and honors the spirits of this land and also does not appropriate? Like, because that's an issue, right? How do I practice American folk magic in a way that's true and not in a way that is appropriative to the indigenous peoples or to the enslaved peoples? And American traditional witchcraft, again, like I will say, has a lot of currents and has a lot of threads, like again, Thelema, because Aleister Crowley was very influential with Gardner and with Cochrane and with Doreen Valiente. Like, it was a whole bit, okay?
Yeah.
But ATW, yeah, it is its own thing now. And in the past, it has not been nearly as structured and as formalized and ceremonial as it is today. Lorelei Black and her wife at the time, Natalie Long, really popularized a lot of what at that time was just called American folkloric witchcraft. And there was a blog post, the AFW blog post, that started, I want to say, in 2001. They were working this tradition and sort of trying to formalize a structure for traditional witches, because like the British, they have their British traditional witchcraft, right? That is distinctly different. It's not Wicca. Like, there is Wicca too, that sometimes is referred to as BTW or British traditional craft. But yeah, so it was really kind of formalized and into a solid tradition in 2001. But since then, we have also had other really big authors, like if you're familiar with Corey Hutchins, New World Witchery. That's a really popular book that focuses on a lot of different, specifically American traditions of witchcraft. I would highly recommend it to anyone who might be interested. And so what started off as something very small and Appalachia based is like there's ATW covens in Canada now. Like we are legion, if you will. And also when it comes to like the age of the tradition, because you're right, a lot of people have these very fantastical stories of their tradition's lineage.
Oh, yeah, thousands of years old, reaching back.
Gardner did too. Gardner himself claimed to be initiated into the New Forest Coven, and the New Forest Coven was this ancient witch cult stretching back to ancient Egypt, like, and it was an unbroken line of witches. And yeah, so that is another thing that's different about this tradition, is that I think there's actually a lot of transparency of like, hey, this is when the tradition was founded, and this is
Right.
what we're doing. You know what I mean? If you're interested, here's the information. But it's also like our other traditional siblings, like we're not out here really trying to proselytize. And we're not, a lot of us, let me say a lot of us, I would say usually interact within our own trad witch communities, as opposed to you often won't see as many at places like Pagan Pride.
Right.
And that's for like a myriad of reasons. And some of that is because a lot of us feel like our religion, and I know this is kind of, oh, my light just went off. I know this is kind of maybe a little controversial because there's the people out there that are like, oh, witchcraft is a practice, not a religion. That's totally fine if you feel that way, to you, okay? To you. But you're not going to tell me how to define my own religious experience. So also,
Right, it's a spirituality and it's supposed to be individual, but I have, because we talked about earlier, you sent me a video of a woman, a whole,
just
like,
the one that was just like berating me.
yes, it
Yeah.
was a bit ridiculous. And like on one hand, I was like, I think part of it, I do think a big part of it was that she was very much hung up on the idea of you working with demons.
Yeah.
And I have seen a more like uptick in like demonolatry.
Yeah, she was mostly uncomfortable about the fact that I was including so much of the devil in my work. And I was trying to explain to her that, for one, like, if that's not your thing, that's okay. Like, I'm not telling you, like, this is the only way. This ring light is stupid. I'm not telling you, like, that is the only way to practice. I'm telling you, this is how we practice. So if you're interested, you can read about it here. This is what we do. If you don't want to work with the devil or the horned god, don't. Oh my God, it's that easy. That's crazy. You literally can just not do it. But then to go into like the defensive mode of telling me that what we're doing is wrong.
Or you can't, what was it, the big thing? It was like, you can't find any justification that doesn't involve the Bible, and you can't use the Bible and call yourself pagan. That was like, because it was almost somebody who got stuck in a loop.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of people out there that share that opinion. Right. And I think that's why a lot of pagans and a lot of traditional witches don't always sit at the same table together.
Right. That actually makes sense. Like, I mean, I would hope that we would be able to welcome you in our community. I certainly would. I could see where, because there is often a traumatic religious experience underneath, people do get defensive about anything paganism is supposed to be nothing Christian.
Right.
And the devil, really, we can talk about how the devil's not really Christian, but that's another conversation entirely. But I definitely, because he is a folkloric character.
Yeah.
Amalgamation of things. Mm-hmm. And often people want to, like, originate him to Pan. Mm-hmm. Which, if you follow Pan's cool guy. Mm-hmm. I love anybody, any god who makes consent part of his practice.
I would say for myself, and I think for many witches of the tradition that I belong to, first and foremost, we need to sort of unpack some of the language in order to actually be able to have a dialogue. Because usually what ends up happening is, in my experience, people, mostly pagans, will just kind of immediately get triggered by the devil, Satan, or Lucifer, any of those names. And they kind of just view them all as the same thing. And I think some of that has to do, especially for us as Americans, some of our Protestant Christian roots, because everything that was not Protestant Christianity was demonic, right? But in truth, even within the Old Testament, the Torah, the New Testament, the Christians' fan fiction of the Torah, basically, let's say that's what it is, and the Quran, Satan, Lucifer, and the devil aren't even recognized as the same thing.
The devil's not in the Bible. Like, let's start there. The devil is an invention meant to scare people. It was almost this is what I've taken kind of from it. It is the thing that we're going to blame everything on so that we can be pure.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one way of looking at it.
It's an excuse.
I think in terms of if we're gonna talk about the unholy trinity, is what I like to refer to it as, devil, Lucifer, and Satan. These are very separate entities that can be related underneath an archetype of the adversary, sure. Right. The old one, sure. But also there are three unique separate identities, and it's a very polytheistic, soft polytheistic way of looking at the infernal divine. The devil, as I know him, here's the thing. The devil is not going to be put into a box. Like, we can say, oh, the devil's folkloric. The devil is really, a mirage of these old horned gods that, the witchcraft inquisitors they would call all other gods devils. And so the devil just became an amalgamation of wild horned virility gods. Sure, that could be true. But we also do have like devils in lore. Like, we have the Greek daemons, or those nature spirits that then later kind of became demon and devil. And Jesus himself in the Bible was tempted by the devil when he went out in the wilderness. And like the connection there with nature spirits and horned ones. Satan is mostly an honorific title. Like, so theoretically, we don't really know exactly like who Satan canonically is. For a little bit of blasphemy here, if you'll just indulge me in some blasphemy, the Old Testament, if we were to look at the Abrahamic holy texts, okay, if we were to look at them the same way that we would any other piece of literature. So, for example, there's multiple Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, like whatever, right? Like there's book 1, 2, 3, then all of a sudden there's a prequel, then there's book 6. Like, if we were to look at these religions' holy books in the same way that we examine literature, the Old Testament is factually and historically the root of this. And the God in the Old Testament, Yod-He Vod-He, or Yahweh, is also found as a Mesopotamian god of war and storms. So like not even really brand new material that's original, repurposed, repackaged pagan material.
Right, like the 16th Jesus.
Yeah. And so it's really not surprising that, in modern times, a lot of people that follow this particular belief system, we can look at them the same way that we might look at how Ares and Mars in mythology is. Like, Ares is known to be a childish, immature, hot-headed god of war. That is the god of Yahweh. That is the God in the Old Testament. He wants absolute submission, and he wants to be the king of all gods. So this is like historical, if we look at this in a timeline, right? And the New Testament is what we would call this, if we were to examine any other piece of literature, we would call this like a fan fiction. But because it's a religious text, that's incredibly insulting and offensive to a lot of people. So we don't call it fan fiction, right? But that is like what it is.
Oof. We're going to go right. You know what? This will be the episode that gets me canceled. Fuck it. Let's go. Although I kind of appreciate this it is an interesting look at it. Here's the thing, like I do have Christian friends and I've got Christian family who would find this offensive.
Yeah, I bet.
But also
that's not my intention. Just to say, my intention is not to shit on the Christians, just like my intention is not to shit on the New Agers. My intention is not to shit on the pagans, but us trad witches, like, we get it from all those angles, because the Christians are like, see, they really do worship the devil. They really are eating babies. The pagans are like, you guys are crazy and delusional, and that's not real. Meanwhile, they're like praying to Athena. Meanwhile, they're like worshiping Hecate, but they're not sacrificing black dogs like they did at her temple. That's kind of weird, but you're practicing an ancient form of paganism in 2025. Good luck with that. And then from just the whole way around. So yeah, my intention is not to be offensive, but my truth is blasphemous, and I stand on that. So the devil is exactly what I just said. I think the devil can be pagan. The devil could be like a pan, like wild god figure. Absolutely. But the devil can also be the devil of the Christians. Absolutely.
Right.
Lucifer specifically is also found within Etruscan paganism. Even before he was kind of co-opted by the Abrahamic faiths, he existed before those books. Lucifer is a light bearer, and that was even a pagan like view of Lucifer, even before the Christians kind of, you know, and the Catholic Church just kind of took it and ran with Lucifer as like, oh, he rebelled against God. He's also the son of the morning, Aurora, the dawn. Like, kind of very similar to like an Apollo-like figure. A lot of people aren't familiar with Etruscan paganism because it's just not as popular as Greek or Roman, but Lucifer is in that pantheon. So Lucifer can be a lord of light, of illumination, of radiance, of art, of music, of poetry, of rebellion, right? And Lucifer can be the very blasphemous Christian worldview of him, but he is actually, like, sorry, pagans, he is pagan as well. And then Satan is kind of a little bit different than the devil and Lucifer in that sense, because we don't have as much like material to actually say we can find Satan in Mesopotamian pagan roots.
Right.
Shaitan.
Well, he was kind of more of a stand-in for like somebody to stand there and argue with God.
Right. Satan, like, it depends on, are we talking about the Quran? Are we talking about the Bible? Are we talking about the Old Testament, right? Satan, Shaitan, is an honorific title for basically the great adversary. And the closest sort of pagan connection we can find with this would be Zoroastrianism. I don't know if you're familiar with that religion or not, but Zoroastrianism is another Mesopotamian, so religion based in the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East. And the idea of a supreme good, like an all good being, and the idea of a supreme evil. Like,
oh yeah, they
being.
think God's an asshole, which, you know.
Yeah, so do the
kind of
Gnostics. So do the Gnostic
right.
Christians, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of theories that God is not good.
Look at the Old Testament. I mean, the devil has never asked me to kill my own son. I'll tell you that. The devil has never asked me to take my son up on a mountain and, you know what I mean? Like that story there. Yeah. The devil has never put me through what God put Job through. Never done that. Never done that. And actually, in the Old Testament, what you will find, which is, again, here's your disclaimer that, like, if this is raising your blood pressure, baby, just come back. Okay. In the Old Testament, so the oldest version of these holy books, of these texts, tell me where the devil, tell me where the crimes of the devil are. Not to play devil's advocate for the devil himself, because he does that well enough for himself. But as a consort of the devil, tell me where he went wrong, because I can reference actually quite a few texts where Yahweh is subjugating the people. He's also very interested in your eternal soul. The devil is not. The devil is not interested. Lucifer is not interested in your soul. Yod-Heh Vod-Heh, Yahweh, is interested in you surrendering your soul to him. That sounds kind of demonic to me if we're talking about a traditional demon. And not to mention, like, pulling inspiration from the Legamenton or the Lesser Key of Solomon, a lot of those 72 demons that we find, or other demons like in Grimoire Verum or the Pseudemonarchia Demonium, a lot of them were nature spirits or old gods of Mesopotamia that were demonized through the three major religions that came up in the Fertile Crescent, like the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians. All of their nature spirits, all of their old gods, Ishtar, Ereshkigal, Asherah, either forgotten to time, texts completely burned and lost, or completely demonized. Like,
I will say, like, because I actually have heard at least a kind of a big chunk of this before. For those of you who want to learn more, there's actually Esoterica He does an academic study of
Mhm.
religions from that area. There's also Religion for Breakfast is very interesting for just to look at a religion. And
Angela's
also,
Symposium is really great.
yes, I love Angela Puka.
Mhm.
Love her accent.
Me too.
Like, I can't help but watch her. I'm like, it's like, I want to hear what you're saying. I have to like turn the screen off.
But yeah, so we do recognize the red god in that way. And American traditional folkloric witchcraft, like I said, has become this bigger denomination that there are different covens that are underneath, right? So even just from one ATW coven to the next, we can't even all agree all the time. But we do have shared values and we do have shared practice, and we are an initiatory tradition that is, in a way, like, spicy word here, but gate kept.
A little bit.
Uh,
That's not a terrible thing though, because maintaining a minimum standard is not bad.
Gates also keep foxes out of the hen house, and safe
Right.
spaces are appreciated.
Right.
So, yeah, you know, so we can't even always agree. I'm going to speak for myself here, and I'm going to speak for covens like mine in the Solar Court. A lot of us also recognize four. So we have the red god, or we have the devil, as just referred to. And whether you want to call him the folkloric devil, which I don't even feel like the pronouns he, him are even necessary, because the devil is very fluid and the devil can be so liminal. Like when you try to
Right.
put the devil in a box of, oh, he's this or oh, they're that, they laugh. Like, because that's not, the devil is the adversary, right?
Right.
But basically, the devil in gold, the devil in green, the devil in red, and the devil in black. The devil in black being the man at the crossroads, the devil in red being your classical bestial, almost like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina the Beast. That's like our devil in red. The devil in green is more like Pan, or a horned, antlered wild god. And the devil in gold is more of a solar entity like Lucifer, a lord of illumination and light. And
Okay.
witches oftentimes will be initiated through one of those four seasons of our devil, of our red god. And at the same time, we also acknowledge we have a trinity. So, and this is something that you're going to find throughout the tradition. This is not just from coven to coven, but we have the white and black goddess that go by these names, and they have very distinct faces to them. But one way that our tradition is different, I think, than our cousins is that we're not a fertility based cult. And I say cult in the historical sense of cult, like, because, anyone who maybe is familiar, if anyone's not, Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca works with their cosmology around their binary gods, consistently coming together and procreating and living and dying. And there's a whole cycle that's built around the wheel of the year there with the horned god and the triple goddess. Our gods don't really work in that way. Like, they can overlap in that sort of way, but also like they function as like three separate, almost like sort of characters in the story that have connections, but are not dependent on their sexual procreation per se. So that's another big difference.
It's interesting. Like, this would be something that if somebody wanted to go and study more and they could find the books to do that. I would also like to talk about, because you have an interesting way of looking at the separation of spirit, like the red, black, and like white and red threads. Is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the red,
white, and black. You're going to find that as also a very common theme throughout traditional witchcraft. And the red, white, and black speaks to kind of, I would say, the foundation of our belief structure and of our tradition, because it touches on our trinity, which, as American traditional folkloric witches, you can work with XYZ. It's not like you have to only work with these three spirits. No, of course not. Right. But these would be like, if we had a pantheon, these would probably be at the top of that pantheon, right? But demons and nature spirits and river spirits and nymphs and otherworldly spirits, absolutely recognized. The red, white, and black refers to the red god. So the red of the red, white, and black is the red god, who is the devil.
Right.
And then the white refers to the white goddess. And the black refers to the black goddess, not to necessarily be mistaken for a binary system of good and evil, right and wrong, light and dark,
Right.
because that's how most people, when they first look at it, they're coming from that sort of understanding, because culturally, that's
kind of what they think of as that
Yeah.
scale of like
the black
good-
goddess for us is known by different names and can come in the guise of other faces, right? But ultimately, our black goddess is the great weaver of fate. Like, so she might be similar to like the Mirai. She might be similar
Right.
to like the Norns or the Weirds. People have also experienced her through other gods like Hecate, for example, or Hel. I interpret her also as very chthonic and underworldly and
I
connected.
do love me a dark goddess.
Yeah, she's very that
the dark
coded.
goddess here. That's actually not what I was referring to, because in the book, because I read this much of the book. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I am going to go finish this book at some point, but I was referring more to the structure of an individual, like
the three souls.
The three souls. Yes, that's what I'm
Okay,
talking about.
so this also plays into so in traditional craft, there is what is known as mysteries. And this plays into gatekeeping a little bit and initiatory hierarchies of coven structure. The mysteries, like light and darkness, light and darkness, dark and light. The Song of Ice and Fire, the sword that cuts both ways. You know, what two words are never spoken in the cauldron? Like, these are craft mysteries that it's not that I know the information and I'm gatekeeping it from you because you're not initiated. It's that they can only be experienced. So what the Song of Ice and Fire means to you could be completely different than what the Song of Ice and Fire tells me.
Right.
But to play into the red, white, and black, overall, that's a craft mystery. However, if you're talking about the three souls, I can talk about that. So we believe that we have a tripart soul. This is fun. I love talking about this.
Yeah, I was very interested in this, and especially since we've been talking for. This is going to go over, folks. We're just going to keep talking until we feel like we're done.
Okay. You could always like cut this into part 1, part 2.
I may cut. I've actually got a couple of people lined up that I'm trying to do just one of these a month because I've got so much else on my plate. But
but if we talk for 2 hours, you could release 1 hour at a time.
Maybe.
Just so you have more of a backlog of content,
Maybe. Well, don't worry about that.
Okay. So, the tripart soul is not unique to our tradition, and there are other cultures that share similar thought about the human soul. We believe in the human soul. We believe in the red soul, the white soul, the black soul. These three souls together kind of make up the witch soul.
Right. It kind of seemed like the Egyptian concept of like the ba and the ka and the body.
Right. Yep. So we have our white soul, which is connected to the starfire heavens above, kind of like that, we are stardust, if you will. And the belief that when we die, our white soul returns to the stars and is kind of recycled and reincarnated in a way. Like, we go back to this idea of a cosmic soupy source of starfire because we have starfire within us and we are made of the stars. We are children of the stars and we are connected to the cosmos through our white soul. Our red soul, which is sometimes, you might also see it sometimes called like the bone soul, because it's the blood that is in our very bones. And the red soul connects us to 2 very specific types of spirits. So your beloved dead and your mighty dead, those are terms that are used to describe your mighty dead are the witches who have come before you. So the people from, your lineage, your line, your coven, extending even beyond ATW, because ATW is a child tradition from other traditions that we have threads, if you will, in, like our cousins across the pond, like the Robert Cochrane, Gerald Gardner debate. So it connects you to the mighty dead. It also connects you to the witches of the past. So, for example, La Foyacine. I've been connecting more with some of my own French ancestry, and Lafoy is seen as a really iconic witch. If you don't know her, she was associated with the affair of poisons and was allegedly leading Black masses under the Catholic Church. She was executed in the 1600s. She's an icon. So let's just give her a shout out. But so your
I
red
love a
soul,
podcast that gives me homework. I've got so much homework to do.
yay! Your red soul, yeah, connects you to those witches, but also to your ancestors. So your beloved dead is your literal bloodline, your mom and your dad, right? And then when you go back further, that generational line amplifies because you have two parents, right? You have four grandparents, you have, right? At like every generation, it builds on itself. So your red soul, you have part of their red soul running through your blood. You have ancestral power and magic from your ancestral practices, which for us as Americans, a lot of us feel very disconnected to. How many of us can actually go back in our family ancestry more than 3 or 4 generations? If you can, you're very lucky. If you can, that's not very common. So, and then, yeah, also the witches have come before us. So it's in our blood. And then the black soul, this is the part of us that is very like terrestrial of this planet, of this earth. And it is connected to kind of like the forged fire within the earth. It is connected to the fertile, rich black soil that all things terrestrially return to and come from. And it's also where our fetch is. So there's more of a popular eclectic witch / new age phraseology of like my spirit animal. That's a lot to unpack. And I'm not going to go into that. So we call it a fetch spirit. Fetch spirits are the animal aspect of our witch soul, and it's often the animal form that you may take in flight, where you shapeshift into that animal. When I say shapeshift, I'm not saying that I believe I turn into an actual wolf or serpent or butterfly or whatever. Like our physical flesh does not change. Like I'm not saying that.
Right. Yeah, we're not like this is a meditative, like a
this is Witchflight, right?
Right.
So when we envision in this practice, sometimes it can be helpful to do the shape-shifting ritual, which I did include in the book for people that maybe are interested in shape-shifting or maybe are interested in the idea of working with animal spirits, but want to do so in a way that is more true to the spirit of witchcraft and is not just culturally appropriating indigenous practices. But hey, I'm not the cultural appropriation police, but do your own research, do your own homework, and really take a look at your practice and be honest with yourself. You don't need to be accountable to me. But that's why I like the term fetch, because it feels more true to actually what I'm doing. And so, yeah, that's the red, white, and black souls. Did I answer the question?
That's interesting. Okay, so let's take a minute. Like we are coming up on an hour, and I do want to have you back for another episode in like June, which we'll probably shoot in May. Go ahead and let's wrap up by talking a little bit about where people can find your books, some of the services you offer, and about your YouTube channel.
Sure. So you can find me on most social media platforms as Jasmyne Ambrosia. I'm probably going to be most responsive if you reach out to me via my Instagram, which is Jasmyne Ambrosia, or Facebook. Like if you're still on Meta, if you're not, I don't blame you. But Facebook Messenger, Jasmyne Ambrosia. My TikTok is 3 Obsidian Eyes, but that's mostly for shit posting and thirst trapping. And honestly, I haven't been on there in a long time. All of my 3 books, so Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight, which we talked about in this one, Ambrosia's Book of Spirits, which is an extended spirit codex from the first book. Instead of 86, it has 122 spirits. And then my 3rd book, which is a book of Otherworldly Sorcery, completes that sort of Otherworldly series. And all of those are found exclusively on Amazon because I self-publish through Amazon KDP. I'm currently working on a project that I can't like necessarily give a lot of details about, but I'm planning next year to have a Midwest Witches grimoire that will exclusively highlight folklore and magical places and spirits of the Midwest of the United States.
Right.
So I'm excited about that. If you're interested in learning more about American traditional folkloric witchcraft, you can check out the Red Thread Academy online, and you can look into this tradition. And you can even train within the tradition, even outside of the typical like boundaries of covens and initiations. You can just train in the tradition as opposed to a coven. As far as services go, I do offer readings and astrology castings, and I do wedding ordinations and X, Y, and Z. You can just Google me, and you'll figure it out. So yeah, thank you for having me,
Figured out.
and letting me be a little blasphemous.
This has been a very interesting episode. I appreciate you coming on. This is definitely giving me like homework. This is giving me homework. And it is interesting to kind of to look at things from a new and different perspective, because like most of y'all know, I am a chaot. So I like to tell people it's absurdism meets occultism, and part of I believe very much in the sacrifice of ego. So when something makes me uncomfortable, I want to examine why. And some of the things that we talk about do make me uncomfortable, and I have to examine why. And I do, like we talked about how, and I do think it is a big part of it is that the concept of the devil. But after having like talked about it, and it is interesting. It is an interesting way to look at spirituality.
I feel like too, if our craft is not sometimes making us a little uncomfortable, I don't know what you're doing. Like,
Right.
I don't know how we're growing as people and evolving if we're not sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. And it's completely fine to feel, some discomfort around some of these topics. And for anyone else watching who's maybe like, oh my God, this Jasmyne bitch, that's okay.
Y'all don't come for me in the comments. I don't want to hear it.
That is okay. And it's also okay too to learn about another system or tradition without necessarily it being like for you. Because I also believe there can be multiple paths to truth. And this is my truth. But you are welcome to have your truth too. And sometimes when we share our truths, they do challenge each other. And I'm actually very interested in not only where our truths challenge each other, because those are really great conversations if both parties can be respectful, but I'm also really interested in where they overlap, not to be sappy, but
I think that sometimes is where the fight really begins, is when things are just slightly overlapped but off step.
Well, yeah, it's with the American traditional witches and some of the Wiccans where we are like the devil and they're like the horned god, and we're like the devil and they're like the horned god.
Like, no, it's not the devil. The horned god is not the devil. Oh my God.
But yet we are still at the same Sabbath at the end of the day. Like, okay.
Fair enough. I do think that, you know what, I will agree that, like, because the horned god is often depicted as a god with antlers.
Yes.
And has more to do with like what is it, Cernunnos, the Celtic one?
Yeah, it can.
Yeah. So I definitely see, like, I see the argument where it is the devil, and I can see the argument where it isn't. And I see where people who are a little, like, I understand, nobody wants to be told what they believe. Nobody wants to hear, this is what you're actually believing, this is what you're actually saying.
Well, we were talking about this before we started recording, and I was saying how I think that's actually very true to the spirit of American witches. Per our history, you're not going to tell me what to do on this land.
Right.
Like, so I think, and interestingly, and I did want to bring this up too, interestingly, it's actually very different in the vampire community, because I am part of that as well. The vampire American community loves a hierarchy. The vampire courts, the vampire monarchies that we have here, which is crazy because that's kind of the antithesis of our American history. We said, fuck the queen. You know what I mean? Fuck.
Right.
But
Well,
the
they
vampire
said fuck the queen because they couldn't be the queen.
Okay. But the vampire community very much embraces the idea of gatekeeping, hierarchies, degrees, courts, balls, monarchies. American witches, 9 times out of 10, their hackles instantly come up. Like, as soon as it's like even just mentioned or talked about. So,
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. That is a touch point for myself as an independent solo practitioner of chaos. Like there is intentionally as little not communal structure, because like I am in the pagan community. That's what I build my structure off of. But for religious sake, like we can go and do rituals together, but to try and structure that religion, it feels it is not part of my path.
yeah. And
You
it's
know
not
that,
part of many people's paths. And I think that's your truth.
right?
And I think that's completely, if that is what makes you feel alive in the spirit of craft, and if that is what makes you feel empowered, genuinely and truly, I fully support that. At the end of the day, I believe in empowerment, beauty, freedom. That's what the craft to me is all about. The pitfall that I see a lot of times with, we're going to say, the pagan community, I don't see that. If people want to lump me in as pagan, that's fine. And honestly, sometimes depending on how much I actually give a shit to dialogue with someone, I'll just, yeah, I'm pagan.
Whatever. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm pagan. Maybe it's similar to you with like KO. Like maybe your coworker is just like, oh yeah, she's,
It's much easier.
pagan.
Though that's
Like,
part of why I don't for a long time I didn't tell anybody that I was a chaot. In fact,
yeah,
I'm only kind of it is the religion of basement dwellers, as much as I hate to admit. Like there's a few really there's more cool chaots out there now. Like we've got oh my god, her name completely eludes me. Ivy. Have you seen her stuff?
yeah,
Right. Now we've got people who are kind of have their shit together a little bit more. Much as I hate to say that, but like, because when I was exposed to it, I basically got somebody's copy of Libernal and Psychonaut, because I was not very active on the internet. This was before that was a big thing,
mm-hmm.
in the late 90s and early 2000s. So a lot of the people that I knew who also would identify as chaots were not people that I identified with.
Yeah.
So, like, to say I was part of the pagan community, it was like, because I was kind of looked at paganism as being, as much as I would never downgrade paganism, but it is sort of a catch-all for minority religions, because we
It
do
is.
kind of accept
Yeah,
people
it
who
is. And it's not one thing. You
right.
cannot even define, you go from state to state,
It's
right?
intentionally ambiguous.
And I think that that's actually really harmful. I think that that's not controversial hot take. I think that's actually really not serving any of us. I think a lot of people are under a false idea that there is a pagan community. There are people that identify as pagan and maybe they congregate. Like you might have a pagan night out in your area. There is pagan pride. But truthfully, at the end of the day, and honestly, this applies to witch too, because people talk about the witch community. What even is that?
Fair.
Really? Like, what actually is that? Because same with witches, you can put 10 of them in the room and have 13 different opinions about what a witch is and isn't, and what the craft is and isn't. I mean, vision boards are witchcraft to some people,
That is true. That is actually very true.
My witchcraft involves more like feathers and bodily fluids and conjuring spirits, you know. But anyway.
Right. And that's fair enough, because you would consider yourself witch, and so would somebody who is very much new age.
Yeah.
Loving light, modern metaphysical.
Yeah. And I'm not the witch police, nor am I the witch patrol. I'm not going to go up to someone and say, well, you're not a witch. I'm not interested in that. If you want to take on that title, that moniker, you are absolutely welcome to take it. Like, there is no one that can tell you that you're not. But none of us can actually agree on what these terms are. Examples of pagan community I find to be incredibly lacking. I find them to be mostly kind of almost like tribal bands of minority earth-based religions that come together under the guise of community, but most of them can't even really tolerate each other very well. They actually share very different worldviews, politically and religiously, you know? So when I'm thinking of traditions, like religious traditions, Methodists might have a little bit of difference between their churches, but a Methodist can explain to you why they're Methodist and not Baptist. We don't have that within paganism. Some people like that. Some people think that that's a good thing. I think that it creates a false sense of community. And I think the same for like the witchcraft community, like be it online or in person. And I know that's a really spicy take.
That
Like,
is a spicy take, and you are bold. I'm the president of the local pagan pride community. Damn.
can
I'll
you
give you credit.
see can
I'll
you
give you
see
credit.
some of where I'm coming from?
Some, definitely some, and I think that was kind of. I definitely see where there is a part of a false a false I'm trying to think of the word. I want to say false community, because here it really is a real community, especially in like a smaller, more oppressive location. Because like I'm in West Virginia, y'all.
Yeah.
I
I'm in
know,
Indiana.
right?
Indiana
Yeah,
is the birthplace here in the Midwest of electric shock therapy for LGBT people. This is a
right. Yeah, I know.
horrific,
You just
horrible state.
shared a flyer that the Ku Klux Klan was
Yeah.
passing out. Like,
Yeah.
what they have, their meeting is what, February?
And it's not far from me. It's in my backyard. Like, it's
Right.
not far. It's scary.
So, like, there is some need to, and like, I do think that paganism, and much like witch, is intentionally vague. These both started off as pejoratives. Like, I know the heathen community kind of has a set pantheon and things like this and that, but also most people are still using heathen to refer to anybody who is acting wild,
Right. Or
anybody,
godless or
or godless, and it was
what,
often
how do you
a
define
pejorative for Native
community?
Americans.
How do you define community? What is community to you? Like what would you say community is tangibly?
Tangibly speaking, community is, I think it's a bit fluid, honestly, because I've been I was a solo practitioner for a long time. I'm still getting comfortable with the whole concept of community, but
Yeah.
in theory, much like the LGBT community, it would be something that sort of a common denominator that brings people together to socialize, more or less. Like, if you have a member of, if somebody dropped somebody off on your doorstep and said that this person is trans and they've just been kicked out of their home, because you are a member of the LGBT community, you are going to be more likely to, if you remember, talk about that in that June, you're more likely to accept them in your house. And I can see where that, in much like the LGBT community, that can be very toxic. People do use that to gain advantage. And I think sometimes community is just it's another structure, but we are social creatures by nature. And so finding that community helps give us some sort of base. And also, if we act as a community, we can do some gatekeeping. We can start the whisper networks and warn each other and watch out for each other. In theory, it should be a supportive group of people. Usually, and the thing that the community is, paganism, LGBT, whatever kind of community, is simply the thing that draws people together. It is the thing, and often it is often the thing that is being repulsed by the rest of the area, people in the area. But you think about it, you have church communities. They're
Yeah.
not necessarily being repulsed by anything else. They're just getting together, hanging out, spending time with each other,
Yeah.
trying to make human contacts, these networks of human contact.
I know a lot of people who like their church community, it's actually more about the sort of social um, safety net that comes along with that of having
Yeah.
contacts and networks than it is about the religion. Like they might feel, oh yeah, I like, Jesus Christ is great and whatever, and I'm Christian, but like they're also going to socialize with the church hat ladies. You know what I mean?
Right, right. And we
So,
honestly, if you think about it, social safety nets being set up by some sort of centralized government is a fairly new concept.
yeah, and I do like your definition of community. Like when you explain it that way, I can see the parallels of these sort of
We have a common struggle, you know.
but would you, if a pagan was dropped off at your house and all you knew about them was that they were pagan, you would invite them into your home?
I'd have to give them the up and down look. But I would if somebody dropped, because I've been pretty open on this channel.
Yeah.
I am a non-binary person. I'm bisexual. Well, I guess pansexual, whatever, I'm old. But
I'm pan too, and I'm trans, so yeah.
right. So like dealing with that, having been in the community for a while, I would not I would more likely take in somebody who is LGBT or somebody who's pagan than I would maybe just anybody, because I would
Right.
assume that the person dropping them off had somehow vetted them to find them to my door.
Right. I would hope so too.
I would hope that would be the case, because you're not just taking in this person, you are accepting the recommendation of whoever dropped them off.
Right.
Like
that would be how I would respond to, if there was a trans person that, XYZ happened, they were dropped off at my door. There's not enough context there for me to say what exactly I would do in that situation. But similar to you,
Right.
I would think that the person dropping them off at my door, there would be that there. I brought up the pagan bit because if someone dropped off a trans woman at my door, to me, that is a little bit different. I can see very specific things with that case than I can a pagan, because most pagans can't even identify within an overarching, like, what is that? Okay, you're pagan.
Right.
So what is your worldviews? What is your values? Like, what is your politics?
Like, here's the two things that I would look at. What is their need, and how much of a threat do they pose to me in my home?
Yeah, me too.
Those are the things that if anybody, I would hope anybody, and not just members of the LGBT community, but if you are a woman or even a man, because I honestly, as a professional psychic, I get a lot of gentlemen of color who come in here and tell me about, we call it henpecked, which is probably kind of derogatory, but basically men get abused too. And we do need to talk about that, but not now.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody is being abused by their significant other and they run to my house in a bid for freedom, I'm probably going to not consider how much threat they are to me as much as I am their need, until they get annoying. Like, I'm going to try and help that person more. Whereas somebody who I know has couch hopped across everybody's freaking doorstep, I mean, like, here's the number to the shelter.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. And with the ideas of community and religion and pagan, I think some of my own like worldviews on that are just from how disorganized and messy my local. So I definitely don't want any of that to be a pejorative to your work. I really don't know anything about like what you do as a president of your local pagan community. And I would love to like hear about that. Our local pagan community, our pagan pride day is a mess.
Right.
No one can agree on anything and get anything done because no one wants to actually work together, because everyone has these really big egos and you're not going to tell me what to do. And so actually what ends up happening is nothing gets done. Or the flip side of that is everyone is so hell-bent on, making sure that everyone's opinion's heard and everyone's right and everyone's valid. And it's so democratic that also nothing gets done. And they don't even like each other. they don't even like each other. Like they genuinely, they put this on like it's this, oh, pagan pride.
Big community love fest.
It's not. It's not. And for me, when I get together with my coven, we are doing work. We are working, we are weaving. Weaving
Right.
as a metaphor for working spells and doing ritual. I'm not interested in a social group. If you want that, I definitely can see the benefit of like a pagan night out where you're going and you're just meeting people of different, maybe, hopefully shared values, depending on
Right.
what you are. But for me, when the coven gets together, like we aren't just hanging out and kikiing, like we're getting our hands dirty and some craft and working together. I have witnessed our local pagan community that does not happen. They do not work that way. Like,
here's another thing. Like you're talking, you want the greater pagan community does not. It doesn't work like that here either. Like there's the kindred, there is the Black Forest Clan, there is the UUC, there's a group down in Huntington.
right.
They're kind of like the banner, because the paganism is the banner. It's not
to mention the hundreds, if not thousands of solitaries, right? Like
oh
you
my
have
God,
the
like they
tradition.
don't come out of the mountain around here. You
I
will
love that.
never know how many witches there are. You will never have any idea how many people went up in that mountain to go and spend time worshiping the dirt without people pestering them. And that's the way it should be. Like you don't have to be a part of the community. But also, especially with politics being the way they are, with In God We Trust being plastered over our schools and the push of Christian nationalism, I think any solidifying thing that brings people who are going to be potentially victimized together, and especially if that solidifying thing brings people of more marginalized communities into community with people who are less likely to be victimized, then that is a good thing. Teaching like on a very individual level. Because like paganism has nothing to do with your gender. You can be a straight white guy or a black trans woman and be in the same room. It gives something for people to organize around. That's where I'm going.
I mean, I would argue that paganism isn't even anything specific. Like
Yeah,
if it's this umbrella term, then there is no structure at all for the best in some ways. There's no structure. It's very fluid. It's a banner that represents different people. But at the same time, it's also kind of the worst in that sense because there is no concrete, this is a recognized, like.
No, and that's fair. That is absolutely fair to say that because we do have, and then like I think especially there has been a long tradition of having like, it is funny because we have usually like the queer Christian preacher who likes to show up at the pagan circles. Like somebody or somebody brings their Christian.
What do y'all do with the pagan circles?
Call the corners and stuff, things. I'm going to edit this shit out because I am not going to embarrass my community like that.
Okay. I'm really not trying to like be adversarial. I'm genuinely curious.
I'm kind of glad, I it would be nice to sit down with my hands on my knees and think about these things and have answers to these questions, but that would never happen. I'm going to be asked on the fly, and it's at least I know that you're doing it respectfully versus having to deal with an angry Christian.
Oh yeah, and like I really like having critical conversations, like critical thought conversations around literature, religion, orthopraxy. Like I want to know why you move the way you move and why you believe what you do. And I want to understand that because I'm interested in understanding our species. Like I'm interested in understanding people. And I think that the pagan community specifically has been something that I have observed that I find extremely fascinating because the pagan community, there's nothing else like it because it almost reminds me of the devil because it's like
the more you try to put it in a box, the more it squirms right out of your hands.
And no one can define exactly what it is. And also like what does community serve? Because within our coven's traditions, like, we have support systems built in to where, like, if someone actually was going to be on someone's porch, we could work with that. Like, there are
Right.
support systems built into the tradition for civil care. And I think that pagans, and I hope it's different in West Virginia, but like in Indiana, there is none of that. There's a bunch of people that get together and act like, they're super
The
knowledgeable about
holier
whatever
than thou.
obscure, yeah, whatever obscure pagan thing there is. There's a bunch of like mostly young white women with blue hair and septum rings who are like really edgy witches that are way more powerful. And they're a 13th generation witch and a high priestess, but they're a solitary witch at the same time. Like, just a bunch of stuff that is very nonsensical to me.
I
And
am
there
not
is
going to sit
not,
here and rail against it. I am not going to defend that because I've definitely met all of those people.
and
Um,
there's not civil care like churches. They will like start a prayer line, be it magically praying for each other, or they will start fundraising for people that have medical bills or people that got into a car accident, or sometimes they even offer childcare. Like some of these churches, right? Now, I'm not saying I'm like, I love the church and whatever. I mean, I have a tattoo of a burning cathedral, okay?
I understand, like, that is definitely one of those pro-con kind of things. This is part of what I do. This is what I am trying to do. This is what the people who follow my crazy idea are trying to do, because we have events, and those are kind of the moments where people get together, they find the local community, because we also know, like, if you're solitary, and that's primarily what people are around here, unless you're part of a group, you're a solitary, and having those events may be the only contact with other pagans that you really
What are
really
the
have.
events? What are the events? Like pagan night out, coffee house meetup?
Well, we have a UUC that meets up.
UUC, United Universalists, Christian, like cups, that thing, or is that what that
It's not
is?
Christians. It's like there's pagan groups. They're not Christian. That, like, the UUC itself is not actually Christian. It is the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Okay,
They're
it's kind of like an all religion melting pot, right?
yeah, it's Unitarianism. It's
Okay,
almost like
it's its own thing,
it's its own
kind of.
thing, but they make space for other people, which is part of why I've got so much love for the Unitarians, but also I'm not one of them, because I
Yeah,
think
I've
they have
looked
to get
into, we have a
everybody.
UU church here, and I've looked into them for hosting events, like, because our coven primarily practices outside in the woods. We
Right.
hold a lot of our rites there. But like right now it's 4 degrees, right?
Right.
So I've reached out to the UU church here about like, hey, I saw that like there can be rentals. And because we have this coven, we can all put all this money together and rent something. Like we host a retreat every year that's funded by tradition money. Like it's not one person
Right.
that's having to front the cost of something, and like it's
Yeah, that is
money
a problem in the pagan community, is that it usually comes out of one person's pocket.
and that to me is not community.
Right. Well, I mean, this is something. Here's the thing. Like, that is a problem. That is a problem, and this is why I think it is pagan pride, is that there are groups who are trying. Like, that's kind of what we're trying to fix.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, because there's like a national pagan pride that is, I don't know if it's disbanded or not, but they don't answer their emails.
Oh, really? I know that our pagan pride was kind of a renegade pagan pride. It was started by someone before the coalition was started, which
Right.
is kind of cool. That ours was one of the early like pagan prides before the coalition, but because we weren't part of the coalition, it made room for so much more toxicity because there was no system of checks and balances for people running the event. And this is Indiana. This is the land of the clan.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And see,
witches don't like checks and balances because then you're telling me what to do. So
I
that's
don't
the
think people like,
problem.
yeah, and the people have problems with what I do. People got problems with me sometimes. Just
And
on
I don't.
occasion.
I really don't. I really admire you, and I really hope that anything that I've said in no way is like,
I am more concerned about what I may have said. What you said is your own weight. That is your speech that you've put out in the world, and I would hope to edit this in a way that makes you feel flattered by that. I am always more concerned with my own speech, because I am, especially when I say that I am the president of Metro Valley Pagan Pride, I am not saying that is to be, oh, look at me, I am pompous, which I am, but that's aside. I can be flashy, flamboyant, and I am all those things. But that aside, as a leading, I am attempting to try to bring the pagan community together because it is so many little bits of this and that.
I
And
love that. I love that.
I started this and I started my bit, like, we had an event prior. I inherited Pagan Pride. It was Charleston area Pagan Pride, and it was a one-time event that was started by a guy who also kind of saw this coming on, he saw this on the horizon. And he was a follower of the Morgan, whether she wanted him or not, I don't know, but she took pity on him. And we all loved him, but he was intentionally adversarial. And so there were just things and the stuff. But when he passed, we had come to love that event. It became a spark in the community that started to bring people together to build these groups. And so when he passed, we're all kind of looking at this thing. And then our local government started to do some weird anti-trans stuff, and being a non-binary person, I was like right smack dab in the middle of my gender journey. Full mohawk. We'll talk about that on the next one. We'll talk more about the whole gender journey on the next one. But so I was already having a full mental health episode to begin with, and I had lost my mother and she'd left me some money. So I'm like, I know with my ADHD that I'm going to spend this on stupid shit. I'd like to make at least one thing last. So I talked to his widow. I talked to my friends. I'm like, how can we make this real? How can we bring us? How can we make us? How do we incorporate as many people as possible while excluding toxic elements?
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to build this, egalitarian structure. And it's always started in somebody's fever dream. You need at least one person with bipolar disorder, probably, to kind of step up and have a full ass manic phase
and get shit done.
Get shit done. Like, and I have tried very hard not to center myself in this project. I am trying to. This is more of an idea, because even if Metro Valley Pagan Pride fails, which it might, it's an organization.
Which, let me say this.
It will still be an
as
idea.
As a high priestess of a coven, as someone who's been running a coven for 8 years, as an initiate of my tradition, things that I have learned is when you are called to facilitate space, it's not about putting yourself on a pedestal. And I don't think that you taking charge for your community to build a safe space is you putting yourself on a pedestal. You're in a position of service, just like a traditional high priestess is supposed to be of service to her coven and to her tradition. Right. Really, for us, not the whole community, because we don't necessarily acknowledge like a wider, this is community. That's kind of like a vague. But also, I think that a lot of our predecessors, specifically mostly Wiccans, Scott Cunningham.
I know so many good Wiccans, but I want to talk so much shit too.
Scott Cunningham specifically, with all of his solitary Wicca books, took something that was an initiatory shaped tradition, right, shattered it. Now, sure, he might have done some good things and brought people into the craft and made the craft more accessible, but he also took the teeth, the fangs, and the talons off of the witch and domesticated us into house cats, as opposed to bobcats, mountain lions. Like, we were domesticated. We don't believe in the devil in the 90s. No. We're not doing black magic. We're white witches, right?
Oh, girl, you know what? I have my ex-girlfriend has straight up said this shit to me. She says, like, because she'll say, like, she cannot stand with certain breed of, we'll say fluffy bunnies, just to not piss off any particular group. But they are the Karens of the witch world, who learned their magic off it's TikTok, YouTube, which is also places that I have gained knowledge from. Especially if you are isolated and those are your resources, you use what you got, but you find the magic within. And some people never get more than skin deep.
Yeah. Well, that's another issue that I have with like just using for myself. If other people find value in this, safe travels and more profit to you. I love that. by the
That
way.
actually came from my dad. That's
I
something
love
my
that
dad
so
said because he was a
much.
merchant. We'd be out like, when when you'd leave an event, you may never see any of these people. You may see these people again, you may not see them again. If they died, you would never know. So you just wish them safe travel and much profit because they're also merchants. Like that
I
is
love
not a
that.
religious thing. That comes from my
Right.
father.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. I think that that's
right. It's
I
a
love
way
it.
of blessing. It doesn't cost me anything to wish somebody well. That's what his word. That was his gift to me that I wanted to also give to other people.
Yeah. The witch as a moniker, that's why I feel like if people want to believe in a wider sense of community, and if that brings them comfort, safe travel, and much profit to you, is how I feel about that. But those Karen witches are not doing anything remotely of the sort that I am. And
Right.
so when they introduce themselves as witch, I'm like, oh yeah, like,
It is
okay.
watered down. The term witch is watered
And
down.
who did that? Who did that to the term? People like Scott Cunningham. I'm sorry, y'all, but it was people like Scott Cunningham who pumped out because it was making money for one thing,
Oh my
pumped out
God.
all of these solitary witch books that some of them I know are very influential. And like his big green book, right? Like the herb book, a lot of people discovered witchcraft because of Scott Cunningham. And I think that can be a wonderful thing. But the sacrifice that in order to bring it out of an initiatory experience, which I'm here to tell you that what was going on in traditional Wicca is not what is in those solitary books. Like those
Fair.
solitary books are watered down. It's kind of like when people talk about other closed practices. Well, how is it a closed practice if there's books out there about it? What is written in that book is not the same thing as experiencing this initiatory craft in the group that it was designed to, because it's also designed to be a group work. It's kind of like a
Right.
play. I don't know if you're kind of a theater kid too, but like, sure, you can do a one-man show, but is it not nice to also have a whole cast?
Right.
That to me is what initiatory covenry is. There's built in different roles into covens, and
Right.
it takes one of every kind. And that's the beauty and the magic and the mystery of initiatory and degree based orders that you cannot experience in a solitary Scott Cunningham book.
What I can actually genuinely appreciate. I would never join a tradition because I'm a dedicate to Hecate. I'm a dedicate to the chaos. But I understand the appeal of a minimum standard of education.
Well, do you not consider chaos magic kind of its own
I
moniker?
I do, but I also understand that it is by its nature, you know, nothing is true, all is permitted.
Yeah, like the devil.
Right. So we can build these intricate, beautifully designed practices solely dedicated to one structure, and that works for that person.
Mhm.
But I also see where I can see where your practice works, but I can also see how Catholicism works. I can see how neo-paganism works. I can see, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, I can also see how the darker, dirtier impulses of domination can
If
become
I,
their own
I've always said
practice.
if I were to ever convert
Mhm.
to the Abrahamic faiths, I would absolutely re-roll my character as a Catholic. Absolutely.
Episcopalian.
They have
I
some of
did
the
Episcopalian.
most lovely branding and architecture and like the vibes and the fashion and the veils and the Hail Marys and the
Oh, the
confession.
rosary. I have a rosary. And
But
then you know what?
also,
It feels so little.
also, Dottie, I think that a lot of traditional witches, and this is something that even other trad witches would probably put me on a pyre for saying, but I think we actually also have more in common, not just with Wiccans, but with Catholics than we do most pagans.
And that is the thing. Are we rebelling? Oh my God. So,
See, I love conversations like this. I really appreciate
I,
you holding this space
We may just make this a super long episode at this point. Like it is what it is. This is one of the things I don't have the experience of rebelling against Christianity.
I don't either.
Right. I don't have that. I don't have the baggage of Christian trauma. And I do think that a lot of people who have that trauma are still rebelling against that structure. And it comes off in a way, almost a spiritual explosion. And then once you've set your ass down and you have decided that this is your reality, anybody who taps that glass, anybody who shakes you up, it feels like an assault.
Yeah, and that has been on the receiving end. Like that has been for sure my experience when I'm just trying to talk about craft stuff and like sometimes I think I get and this is something that I want to work on myself because like, okay, what am I doing to where I'm being perceived this way? Because perception is power at the end of the day. And my intention and my words, I need to find a way to weave those together better because my genuine intention is connection and understanding. But a lot of times I feel like I sow the opposite where like, you know what I mean? Where
actually, this is an interesting conversation right here because I also have run into this myself. As a chaot, I am a follower of the chaos. I believe in the chaos. I believe that each of us have a spark to do good things and bad things. But for every boon you get as a spiritual practitioner, like, you know, if you're going to follow Hecate, she's going to give you certain abilities. She will strengthen you, but she's also going to give you tasks to do with that strength. Like you are signing up for a certain experience when you follow certain deities. And especially if you're going to follow one that is intentionally adversarial, you almost have to expect a certain amount of repulsion.
That's a very similar advice as to what I've been told by some of our sort of traditions elders in the sense of like, by working with the devil, we are inherently embodying the adversarial. And so like our very existence is sometimes it's just going to be that. And I resonate to that as a queer person, like as a pansexual trans woman, my very existence alone, just by me occupying space and being public and not living stealth and talking about my journey is equally as blasphemous as me talking about the devil and witchcraft with some witches and pagans, you know? But yeah, and I would say like, there have been times
being blasphemous that we're able to move that needle though. It's by being blasphemous and loud that we're able to make that less blasphemous. That we're making space for people who are no longer under that oppressive structure because blasphemy itself is a response to oppression.
Right. And I think in terms of Abrahamic trauma, so at the end of February, two things. We have the Witches' Black Lent, which it's a subversion of the Catholic Lent. It's a trad witches Lent. It's a lovely experience. It's about embracing sin in our lives and working with sin. You pick one of the 7 deadly sins and incorporate it into your life. And instead of subjugate yourself from sin, you embrace, like, I'm going to work personally with wrath this year because I can't imagine working with any other sin given this political climate. And sacred wrath is a very powerful thing. And I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to fuck it. You know what I mean? I'm going to make love to it and I'm going to let it embolden me to make change in my local community. I'm picking wrath. I've worked with pride. I've worked with lust. Very powerful ritual subversion. I have gotten the critique from other people before of, well, Jasmine, like, you grew up, your father's side is secular, your mother's side is like Sephidic, which is kind of Sufi-esque. What do you mean? Like you're subverting Catholicism? You don't even have Catholic like trauma. If you're living in America, unfortunately, baby, we are all being crushed by late stage capitalism and evangelical Christianity. So while I might not have Abrahamic trauma directly, our society does. Right now, they're trying to turn it over to where our birth certificates have to reflect the sex assigned at birth. They're trying to take away medical care for trans people. These are direct actions based upon their religious views because people like to pretend that religion and state are separate, and in a perfect world they would be. But unfortunately, we vote on our politics, right, based off what we believe, which is based off of our faiths.
You know what though? Like, if in a truly,
so I think we all have Abrahamic trauma in America, regardless of whether you grew up Christian. I think you can be a practicing Muslim and have Abrahamic trauma because of the way that
I mean, that would be
Christians.
You know, well, even if that's the whole, like, no solidified religion, no state religion is healthy. Like Hindu, look up the cow lynchings. It's terrible. Anytime that any theocracies are bad. And in a truly open society, I forgot what the word I want to use here, but we'll go with open society. In a truly
like secular,
yes, in a truly secular society, there would be no need for pagan pride. It would be a coffee in the afternoon. There would be no need for So would you say that your interpretation of pagan pride serving the pagan community is actually more about political activism? It is for me personally, yes. I don't necessarily take that entirely into the community because I'm kind of slowly trying to, like, look, y'all, we need to vote for our own interest here.
Right.
But I understand that I'm also speaking to people who do not politically follow me. And that paganism itself is not a political title, although in a Christian nationalist society,
we're all being put on the pyre regardless.
Yeah, the encroaching Christian nationalism puts us all in the same room. And the sooner we can realize that and work together, the more of us will survive.
I think that's another reason why, for me, like the moniker of pagan, I just don't feel like it fits as much, because I experience the same thing where there are people of wildly different views and values, and we are nothing alike.
Right.
And I don't even want to entertain the idea that we are under the same umbrella, because we're nothing alike.
You know, and I understand that because there are people who say they're heathen, and I do tend to do this. I too tend to falsify people who I do not feel like have my same moral standing. Specifically if they are racist, sexist, homophobic. Like, if you are those things, I do tend to demean their faith. In like paganism.
Because their faith shapes that. Like our belief, our literal orthodoxy shapes our orthopraxy. Our belief system, our values shape how we move, speak, what we vote for.
Right. And so, like, yes, there are people, there are people who voted for Trump in our group that I would still consider a part of the community because they show up to meetings and because they do commune with us.
And when you say community, you're talking about the pagan pride that you're the president of? Or are you talking about a specific, like we talked about the pagan community being an umbrella and there being like, oh, there's the Gardnerians, the Alexandrians, the traditional witches, there's the Druids, there's the heathens, there's the band of solitaries that, like, who knows what that is.
Never come out of the mountains. They just ain't coming down. 13th generation does not want to talk to us. Yes. I still would say that I would still stand up for their right to be there. You know what? And like, that is kind of because that is where, and this is the part of the reason I am squirming like a worm here. Part of the reason that I am just feeling like
squirmy to me.
I feel squirmy. I have felt squirmy. I am being tested. It's in the middle of a whole thing. That's been my January theme is, am I strong enough to do this job? Because I am being tested. This is just one more exam, dear. It's all right. And I expect that because that is what I have dedicated to. That is part of my spiritual path, is to never fear the eye. You know, I work on YouTube. I used to be a nurse. No nurse worth her salt fears being watched.
Yeah.
You know, I try not to fear the eye, but I am human. I am imperfect, and so is my community. And I am not my community, and I try. Anytime I speak for the community, I feel uncomfortable because this is an amalgamation of people trying to survive.
Because maybe it is a banner of various, like, I don't want to use the word tribe because that doesn't feel quite right, but it's a banner of various minority traditions and solitaire.
Yes.
And so you can't really speak. You can't. But you are, if you are stepping into this president, you are stepping into a facilitator role. And I would say, if I was talking,
to define it then, like as
I was talking, to another high priestess, it is your job to keep the security of your coven circle. Now, I know that you're the president of this pagan pride, and that is going to come with differences than like working as a high priestess in a traditional craft coven. But I actually think that there's overlap here because
it's funny though, because like I tend to dismiss rituals. I'm like, okay, whoever wants to do the ritual, we actually made it more of a tradition to try and give it to the person who's least experienced to try and do our opening and closing, because there are traditions that require public ceremonies and people trying to get out there. So rather than trying to give it to the one most experienced person over and over and over again, we try to like divide it up, like different traditions, different groups, different people. And it does end up being a little bit of the same because there's a flavor. There is an underlying flavor that is paganism. But like you said, it is
which I'm going to say something controversial yet brave, if you don't mind. The underlying flavor of American neo-paganism to me is eclectic Wicca. Is very much how it feels. Is Scott Cunningham's kind of eclectic Wicca. Calling the quarters
somewhere. Like I'm trying not to just say this. You know what I want to say? I don't know if you know what I want to say, but I'm gonna say what I want to say. A lot of times we kind of think of Wicca as being a jumping off point rather than its own legitimate religion. And there are people who practice Wicca in good faith, and we all know somebody who read one book, calls themselves Wicca, and then goes out and does whatever the damn well please.
Right. I would actually say that that's not Wicca.
Right. No, it's not Wicca.
That's what I would say.
They're not practicing Wicca. They just call themselves Wiccan. That's not the same thing. And I will stand, I understand that because it is a decentralized religion and there is no standard, there is no deviation.
How do you protect your community? Talking about there being people of different shared values. How do we protect minorities? How do we protect people of color? How do we protect women and queer people in our spaces that we as leadership, whether you're a president or a high priestess, how do we protect these spaces and safeguard them for our community if there is no standard? And if we can share our table with anyone at any banner.
I do believe there's a standard. I just don't believe it's a religious spiritual standard so much as it is a religious spiritual standard in that our religion and our spirituality defines who we are. And there is a line there. I will absolutely never accept like the neo-bulk.
Like some social decorum, like no acts of violence, no hate speech.
But yeah, it has more to do with your behavior, your personal humanity. If you call yourself a pagan and can act right, you come sit by me.
Regardless of what they do outside of that space.
No. We're not going to intentionally, I'm never going to intentionally create a space where I know there's pedophiles. I would never intentionally create a space where somebody was an in some way unsafe person, no racist, no, and I try very hard. And this is something like,
how do you vet the people in such a loose sense of community?
Honestly, I believe the people who would be affected by those other people. If somebody comes to me, like we had to kick somebody out of the Facebook group, not necessarily, and I think that they were not necessarily a bad person, but their behavior was making people uncomfortable enough that we had to address it. And that's a hard line.
Yeah.
And very much in the pagan community, the psychic community more than the grander pagan community, because the grander pagan community are just kind of out there living their lives. And whereas the psychic community, there kind of is among certain, you know, I am a part of a smaller group that has kind of amalgamated, you know, Pisces, I don't like titles, where we have kind of developed a bit of a standard. There are so many scammers out there, spoofing videos, spoofing entire accounts, that there really has become sort of this professional standard that you would not reach out. You know,
I think that there's also like the United American Tarot Association. I think that they also have like a code of conduct specifically for like psychic tarot readers about things that they do not ordain. Now, granted, you can get up on TikTok and do whatever the hell you want. Okay.
Right.
The United Tarot Association really can't come for you because tarot is not a regulated field like nursing. If you're fucking around as a nurse, you could actually get clocked for malpractice.
You can lose your license to work. You can go to jail. You can get fined. You know, all these things can happen to you for malpractice if you don't meet if you don't standards of practice.
And we don't really have regulations for psychics aside from general federal laws when it comes to fraud.
And even those are a little, like, they're hard to navigate, and some of them are pretty weird.
Yeah. And I think they're intentionally written to be complicated to understand.
They're intentionally, because they're anti-Romney laws. A lot of them were designed to, well, not just anti-transient laws. They were designed to target specific groups of people to move them along. They were not designed to necessarily to protect the public. You know, like, because essentially, that's Landis. That's Ma doll. He's gonna call you. Okay. He's we call him my Ma doll. He's my Ma doll-in-law. He is a female impersonator from the 70s. Like, his ass was around when Anita Bryant was on her fuck shit.
Love it.
He actually, like, his husband and him survived a gay bashing. Like, a bunch of Marines jumped his husband and he had to run back to the gay bar to get people to save him.
Another example of how community can pull together.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
want to believe that pagans are capable of that. Like, I want to believe it. I want to see it. I think that would be a beautiful thing. And I think if I come off as critical or jaded, it's because in a way, like, I am, because it feels like the idea of pagan community or witch community is
community in general, honestly. It's
community in terms of LGBT. I know that we have other plans for that, but like, the Stonewall riots were organized through communal efforts, and real progress and change was made, like, because of that. So community can work and pull together in various different, like, genres and subcultures.
Right.
But I don't think that witches or pagans actually want to do that.
You know, I do tend to sometimes think that is true. And I don't always...
It's tough. It's tough.
Like, the whole thing is, if you wanted to be part of a structured system, if that's what you were looking for, you'd be a Christian, because that's what they got. That's what they're selling. They're selling structure. They're selling a step-by-step guide to, I mean, it's essentially a death cult, but...
I mean, it is.
They're selling a step-by-step guide to alleviate your grief. They're selling a step-by-step guide to alleviate
have to think critically for yourself and put blind faith and but I'm gonna say in terms of that I don't know that I completely agree with that belief wise, because I actually think that structure, it's kind of like the word religious. Okay. A lot of people similarly, like witches, people like pagans, witches, druids, whatever, they hear the word religious and they immediately think like, oh, you know, or like at work, if you have a coworker and someone's like, oh yeah, we got a new hire, she's like really religious. Like you immediately think that she's like a evangelical, Bible thumping, like,
Yeah, you
but the
don't think that
thing,
they're like, I'm deeply religious. I'm just also like, I'm deeply spiritual, not religious. I'm not religious at all because that would be
I
destructive.
actually really like the word religious to define my practice because to me, religious
But he's
detail
more structured.
is more structured. Yeah. And I actually really think that within structured systems, it doesn't mean that I've lost my ability for critical thought. And it doesn't mean like, because that's very uniquely Christian. Like we're not proselytizing. We're not trying to
Here's
get
the thing.
witches to join.
Don't make me sit here and stand up for the Christians, but I'm gonna have to after you said that because I know too many good Christians. I know Christians who do critically think, and I love them dearly for that. And I see the ones that are more Christ-like, the ones who are trying to.
But a lot of pagans and witches automatically just make the correlation that, well, if you wanted structure, you'd be a Christian.
And that is something I just did. So
Like, and that is a common like narrative. Like it's not just, and you can hold that belief. Like I'm not saying that, I'm not criticizing you for holding that belief in any way, just for the record. But I'm saying
you
like
know
that's
what?
a
It's something I'm
narrative.
gonna have to deconstruct later, probably off screen, because it is something that like I do. I have a problem with organized religion.
And some
Anyone.
of that is our collective Abrahamic trauma that we are
Right.
suffering under, regardless of whether you personally, on a personal level, have Abrahamic trauma. That's an example of how mainstream evangelical Christianity has completely putrefied the American consciousness because we automatically draw parallels of structured forms of religion to Christianity when there are so many religions out there.
Right. It's
And in my
specifically
opinion,
evangelism, not
witchcraft,
even just Christianity, because Christianity is a much broader band.
yeah, and in my opinion,
Specifically,
witchcraft is one of those.
right.
Like you can practice yoga and you can be a Satanist. You can be an atheist. You can be a pagan and practice yoga. A lot of the denominations within Hinduism, that is an integral part of their faith, yoga and their beliefs. It
Right.
actually overlaps. And so the debate about witchcraft is a practice, not a religion, or on the flip side, more on my side of the fence here, where so many witches, it's, oh my God, it's a religion. It's not that. It's, I think it's actually both. It can be a practice. It can be a religion. If you are more structured in terms of a tradition line, then you're going to be practicing witchcraft, but there are also shared universal beliefs, like with our gods, our spirits, the way that we operate, our codes of conduct. There is an overlap there because that's what defines what a religion is. If
Right.
it doesn't have certain things, it's not considered a religion. Um, so, but you can still practice witchcraft just like you can still practice yoga. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You know, often because we're actually having this debate the other day because I had talked to witchcraft. We tend to think, the craft. These all kind of become euphemisms for using magic. What is magic? You can go the whole argument. Crowley's argument about you can wish for it or you can go in you can make your own sandwich. You can
Mm-hmm.
you can cast a spell for a sandwich, but it's a lot more effective to go to the fridge.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we tend to think of all that magic with a K being under witch.
Yeah.
And
And
without,
I think that's inherently problematic and colonialist because people look at Santeria and they say, oh, that's witchcraft. No, that's
right,
Santeria. That's not, they're not the same thing. Like cultural forms of energy manipulation or folk-based practices and the religions connected to them are not all just witchcraft just because, oh, we view it as magic. I mean, that's the same thing that colonizers do. They look at indigenous people's practices and they say, oh, that's witchcraft. Like we need to
They
convert
call them
that.
all heathens, you know.
Right. So
And
I think,
educated because I'm just reading them. I'm trying to listen to the Malice Maleficorium. I would not suggest
oh,
it.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know. This is one of those bucket list things I feel like I have to do.
It's horrific. It's a really
Oh
horrific
my God,
text.
it's
The
a
Hammer of Witches.
terrible. It's
Yeah,
not even just that it's not even that it's just oppressive and terrible. It is that it is dry in
it's evil.
places.
It's actually evil.
You got to go through it. Yeah, no, it's evil. Like it is evil. It is all the terrible things you think it is. But it's also longer than fucking War and Peace. And I don't need to know the lineage of these assholes. They can all literally burn in hell. They created hell, they can go there. Right. If
well, if I'm going to hell, I would actually rather them be in Tartarus if I'm going to hell, you know, as this evil, horrible, satanic witch. If hell is where I'm, because I've actually been told all my life there's a very special place for me there. So if we could arrange it to where we throw all of them in Tartarus as opposed to hell, that'd be more ideal for me because like I plan to have a really good time in hell.
I got a lot of friends in the heathen community. Hell's a lady, like, you know.
Right.
I'm down to talk to her too. I probably owe her a favor at this point, or at least an apology.
Yeah. I love this. I really do. And you've given me stuff to think about too, because I feel like I am probably not helping the war between witches and pagans and you know
there's
kind of like some of the knee-jerk reactions that we have with Wicca, you know, like
I can't wait to have this conversation again because I know we wanted to talk more about our LGBT communities. And I can see the correlation 1-for-fucking-1.
Me too. Yeah.
And I understand that just because while we may be solidifying against something, that doesn't mean we're amalgamizing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's not what we're trying to do. In a society where we did not have this oppressive force, you wouldn't know these bitches. You could just cast them out of your community and not tolerate them. We would have our individual networks as often we do.
I mean, I would say that that is something that I do and that other people of our tradition, like, okay, our events are not open to the public. They're not. You are going to get a personal invitation to attend a Sabbath. You are not ever going, most initiatory orders are not advertising their rituals public on Facebook for everyone and their bald-headed auntie to come to. Like, because then you invite danger. You invite very real danger to your sacred house, your spiritual house being a metaphor for the space that you create. And as a president or high priestess, we're both facilitating some type of space. We have, in my opinion, a duty and an obligation to not just protect our people, however you might define that. I define our people by the people that I share initiatory oaths with and that I'm in the same coven with, but also the wider tradition. But also, like, the space itself, the sacredness of the space that we collectively create deserves to be respected. And so having someone come to a ritual, like for one, a lot of our covens here in my area have died out. Back during the era of Witchbox, there was 26 plus some covens. And over the years, I think as witches have tried to engage more with some of the wider pagan beliefs of community, they have been consumed by eclecticism. They have been watered down. They have had predators take over their groups and fall apart from within. I mean, really dangerous stuff. And so
that's part of why I wanted to do Pagan Pride is because of the predators that are already fucking out there.
How do you stop someone from coming to a public space when it's advertised?
Honestly, number one, you don't necessarily have to do it in a public space. At least here in West Virginia, where we've had our sites have been in parks that are not technically public.
Really?
They can expel people. We got
parks in like state parks or city parks. Or?
It was a city park that we do.
And that's not considered public land.
It is enough that they can expel people.
The
Because
park
we had
can't.
protesters. We had a toxic element trying to break us down. We had Christian protesters, and they had to stay outside of the park. And it was funny because there was also like a huge kids soccer game tournament going on. So people thought they were protesting the kids soccer
Oh
game.
my God, we had something really similar here where we had a pagan pride going on, and a soccer team thought that they had rented out the park, and it was like a private Catholic school soccer team, just to add insult to injury.
Right.
And they were pissed that there was a pagan pride going on because they had a soccer game. And they tried to get all the pagans kicked out, and Broad Ripple Park, and this was like in the news. You could probably Google this. If you Google Broad Ripple Park pagans, it was this whole thing because the Catholics were basically told like that we had rented out like this time slot in this space in this park, and that they're welcome to also play soccer, but we're not going to kick out the pagan pride thing that's happening at this park because they've rented this amount of space. But there's other space also in the park that you can use for your soccer game. And they were like, no. So it was like that whole
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Here's the thing, is like also we've been trying to define. I would rather have to kick out somebody who turns out to be toxic than to potentially close the group to the single mother who is just looking for some community, who is looking for that social safety net that we cannot trust our government to provide.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whatever that may be. Like
I think we as initiatory witches are notoriously known for like keeping our circles extremely tight.
Right.
Our coven in specific has kind of been critiqued by other covens before because other covens will do a lot more with the wider community than we will.
Right.
Like we actually avoid it. You are not going to really find a whole lot of even digital footprint of our covens because I think that that's how we've been able to survive when so many covens have died out. Like because they have kept more open. And I think that there's degrees to it too, because something like a wider community event maybe doesn't necessarily require the same amount of security or restriction. And we have like a lot of other traditional covens, like we have the inner court, which those are people that are initiated that actually make up the coven. And within that inner court, there is degrees, first, second, and third, which just to say relates to responsibility and service. A third degree is not inherently stronger, better, more valuable than a first degree. It also takes a slew of first, second, and thirds to make a traditional coven. So it's more about responsibility, kind of like how you have members, assistant leadership, right? And then the outer court are people that are dedicants or are just guests. Because we have people that do come to our rituals that are our friends or are other witches that we trust and have personally vetted. That we say, hey, the coven's doing a Beltane thing. You want to wear that pretty flower crown and come fuck around in the woods with us? Like, we're going to be doing this at this time. But it's not really posted on Facebook as like a wider event to where, you know, and so
there are smaller groups within the pagan pride community that do that they don't advertise. Like they may come and hang out in their little cliques or, you know, their groups.
Yeah, at their little info booth.
Their little info booth. They don't have to play. They're still welcome to come and hang out and see what the other people are doing. Like to come and talk to create a space where the heathens and the trad witches can come and chit chat.
I love that. That's
what pagan pride's about. It's not about like it is not a religion. Paganism, I do
really?
not
You don't think it's a
religion. No, I really don't. I think it is a philosophy.
Okay.
I think it is and honestly, this is God, we're gonna get fuck. You know, I didn't realize I felt that way until I said it to you, but here we fucking are. So let's fucking do this. I do not believe that paganism is a religion. I think it is a reflection of philosophy. It is soft polytheism. It is monotheism. Like we said earlier, any box you put it in, it's going to squirm its way out of, because that is not the purpose.
How do you define the philosophy of something that you like? How do you define it being a philosophy if we can't define the philosophy?
You know, that is a very difficult question. And I don't necessarily have to answer that question is my thing.
No. Like,
No, and I'm not saying that isn't like, oh, I don't want to answer that question, but I'm not, that's not how I want to say it, but I don't have to have an answer to that question.
Yeah.
To build the community
Yeah.
around that concept.
Yeah.
And in that way, it is more about a sense of nobility, a standard of
unity,
self-respect. Well, not even self-respect. That's going a little far. God knows. You know, the heathens, they have their noble, 9 noble virtues. You know, the paganism to me.
I don't know what they are specifically, but I'm
right.
aware of them vaguely, you know.
Agreed upon minimum standard and a willingness to call yourself pagan. Like, if you don't feel like you're a pagan, then you're not a pagan. That's fine. Like a witch. Maybe it is so watered down that in and of itself is not, it is a gallingly loose term. But you still, if you're going to go hang out with other witches, you're going to have to match their energy in some way. It is that paradox of tolerance. You can come in and be the weird Christian and still be in the pagan community. That doesn't bother me. You know, and call yourself a Christian pagan. We've got Christian pagans. I don't have to understand their philosophy. I just have to know that I can leave my bag at my table without them fucking sticking their hands in it. I got to know that I can leave them alone with that single mom and her kid. That's what I want out of community. That's how I want to define my paganism. Less about a religion and more about personal morality. Like, I do not believe that you can just ask for forgiveness from some big sky daddy.
It sounds to me like the pagan consciousness, in a way, due to events of the past, like a lot of eclectic movements and solitary movements, it sounds to me that the pagans have almost been stripped of that community benefit of religion that churches have.
Right.
Like when we were talking about how churches have, like, you can get childcare and you can get, I mean, I know that there's even like Bible camp where it's literally like the kids go and they get like free care, right? Which I'm not saying is perfect, right?
I couldn't help it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Or how they have like, they'll do like church like fundraising, like, so like if someone gets injured or someone passes away or whatever. It sounds to me that the pagan consciousness, due to events of the past, more primarily I would say like in the 90s than like in the 60s, because the 60s were really into initiatory orders, like between Thelema and LaVeyan Satanism and Gardnerian Wicca and Alexandrianism. In the 90s, we kind of shifted out of that into everything is valid all of the time. Everyone's personal path is, you know, XYZ, whatever. And through an eclectic practice and belief system, and through solitary being put on an emphasis to where there is no more clergy or structure in these religious groups, we have completely lost the support system that comes along with those that other religions have. And so it sounds like you're trying to rebuild that for your area.
Sort of a collectivism, yeah.
For support, for communal civil work, like.
Yes, that is more, because that is more about what it is. Like, you know, this is not a church. Metro Valley Pagan Pride is not a coven. It is not.
And it's not a nonprofit.
It is a nonprofit.
Oh, it is a nonprofit.
Yes, we are a verified nonprofit, and I think in our, I think in the bylaws it put actually like paganism and minority religions, because that was the grander thing. Because I got friends that are Satanists. I've got friends that are Luciferian.
That's really cool. Were you the one that catalyzed that as a nonprofit, or was that what you inherited?
Well, that is what I ended up doing, because God love them.
Can I ask what sort of communal benefits can come from something being registered as a nonprofit? Like, does that create space for you to be able to better serve this community that you're looking to like build?
In theory, like, God, if I could just keep up with it just a little bit. It gives us a tax haven. You know, like we can put money in a pot. We can buy the little things to put that money in the pot together to do something as a group. And as long as you're willing to participate and maintain the group, then you get to have a little bit of a say in what we do with this communal money, you know? And
So do you have like a board of or a council then?
yeah, we're trying to get that all straightened out because like I said, you know, this is something we started it early 2023.
Okay.
We were super focused on bringing back this event that we were basically just trying not to let die. And then we kind of like lost momentum. We had a big event and we kind of lost some momentum and we were still trying to build it up. But I've got somebody who wants to put together a pagan book of poetry, and we can sell, and the idea is that we would sell that book and the money that would go from that book would create a scholarship fund to help people maybe pay for their applications to college.
That's awesome.
And books and things like that, so that we can bring more education, because this is a slice. This is a solid slice. It is something for people to gather around of all demographics.
That sounds like what I would define community as.
That's the idea. Like, and I don't give a shit what people believe. I'm a chaot. I'm the bastard child of absurdism and occultism. Again, one of these things, I'm a Pisces. I hate titles. I'm not very good with labels. They don't really work for me so good. And anything that, and I don't, my daddy was a Libra. That doesn't help.
I'm a Libra.
Which is probably why this conversation's gone on for 2.5 hours.
I love it though. I'm a Pisces moon too. My moon is Pisces.
Which is probably also why we've gone to the bottom of this fucking barrel too.
I love it. I love it. And I want to do this. One, I would like to do this again, but not even just like for the June thing. Like I think that honestly, I'm not able to have these kinds of conversations with a lot of the people in the wider community.
Right.
Which maybe you're kind of helping me grow in some ways around, okay, community. Maybe I'll stop doing the air quotes, but no, this has been really rewarding.
You know what though? Like, this is the thing as a leader, and this is again, like, this is part of why I've been squirming this whole time, because if I'm going to be a leader in the pagan community, which is a fucking thing all its own. Like, you don't just get to come into any community and say you're the leader. You have to be a part. You have to convince other people that you're worth following, especially in the pagan community where we are burnt by leadership to begin with, because not even talking about the Abrahamic trauma, but inside the pagan community where you get somebody who is, you may have
one of the cult leader, really. Yeah. No, I get you. We have ways of codes of conducts about how leadership works too, because it plays into the degrees, and like we have training, and so you go through this initiatory experience, you go through these degrees, and you earn your title. You don't just show up and like, oh, I'm a this, I'm a that. Like, there is presentable work that can be shown of year and a day study of XYZ, blah, 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 with each degree. And like, there's things I can't even talk about publicly, but no one could ever walk into a trad coven and say that they're X, Y, or Z if they really aren't, because there's a decorum and there's
you know, like, and then sometimes I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that on one hand, and then on the other hand, I can see where it is exclusionary to people who are not going to have the time, energy, or money to follow that path.
Yeah, and also covens are notorious for also like
being exclusionary.
Yes, yeah. And I believe that I do hold the value that individual covens under the tradition of whatever denomination of tradcraft, I do think that coven should be able to have autonomy. Controversial hot take, not to go to the bottom of the pit of Tartarus again with you. I think that the Minoan Brotherhood or Dianic Wicca, these are my two favorite to bring up. The Minoan Brotherhood, for anyone who might be listening, if this makes it into the final cut, is a magical order for like gay and bisexual men. The Dianic Wicca in the past is a little bit different than what it is currently. The founder, Z Budapest, is pretty turfy. In the past, it was pretty exclusionary to menstruating, specifically like cis women. Like even menstruating trans men couldn't join. I guess I can kind of find some overlap with what you were talking about community, because here's the thing. I'm not in either of those groups, nor do I want to be, right? But I think that if a group, like if a gym wants to be a women's only gym, okay, who am I to say like they can or cannot do that? Like, I don't have to go to that gym. Also, if in Dianic Wicca we're sitting around a red tent and menstruating together, as a non-menstruating person, I'm not sure how much that's going to offer me. So why would I be trying to join that group anyway? So is it really they're excluding me? Maybe, but what am I really missing from not being included? Nothing, because I'm not a Dianic Wiccan. My magic and power does not come from menstruation, though I do think it is a sacred thing in of itself, okay? But mine does not. And I believe that they should be able to exist. Do I think that their religious views should be able to incite hate speech and violence? Absolutely not. You know, if Dianic Wiccans think that they're going to come after an endocrinology clinic or like a gender nexus that's helping people change their legal gender markers in their name, and they're coming in the name of Diana to try to persecute, like that's crazy. No, I don't support that. But I think covens have autonomy, absolutely. For our coven individually, there have been people that we have specifically just revoked their invitation to come to Sabbats because they don't flow well with the coven egregore, with the collective energy. They're not a good fit. It would be dishonest of us to continue to invite them if we know we're not interested in weaving with them in any capacity. That doesn't mean that they can't be a witch. That doesn't mean they can't pursue other covens. That doesn't mean I'm kicking them out of this wider community. It means that I don't have to share my spiritual house with you because I don't give everyone a key to my house because I lock my doors. You know what I mean?
And that is fair, honestly, and I understand exactly. And you know, and I understand also it is galling that there are groups that would not, you know, there's no way I would ever join the gay men's witch community.
Right.
You know, and I understand why it would be trying to break those down is as dogmatic and screwed up as them trying to break other people down.
Absolutely.
You want to exist. You want to like, okay, you know, you don't have to be opposed to somebody else's existence to not want them in your house.
Well, also certain groups like some groups are fertility based, and so they work in working pairs, and their magic is fertility based. And for some groups, that means that they work within male-female partnerships, because that is how their magic works, because sex magic and fertility work is an inherent part of their magical structure within their coven.
We talk about freaking using your coven as a polycule. That is a whole nother issue for a whole nother day.
I subscribe to that? No. Does our coven work that way? No. We are more, instead of being a fertility cult or a death cult, I would say we're more of a mystery cult.
Right.
Okay. However, I also would not join a fertility cult because I'm not interested in that. I also,
I'm not here for that.
With my gender and sex does not fit within that magical paradigm. So why am I going to berate some of these Wiccan covens about, well, why aren't you guys going to include me? Because that's just not a place for me. I don't even want to be there. And I don't need to be there to be a witch.
Right. And you know what? And I would side eye the group. I kind of do side eye these groups. I wouldn't want to be a part of them. I do kind of like, I wonder how healthy a group is that is based around these sort of things.
Yeah.
I wonder
I think that's a valid criticism because
there's certainly an echo chamber
have you ever looked through the Witch's Bible?
No, I haven't.
By Stuart and Janet Farrar. I think you can find a PDF copy of it online. I think it might be in public domain at this point, but Stuart and Janet Farrar are Wiccans. Oh. Janet is still alive today. Stuart has since passed, I believe, and she's with Gavin Bone now, but they are Wiccan, and their book, The Witch's Bible, is really interesting. It presents traditional initiatory Wicca as best as they could at the time.
Right.
At that time, I think Janet was like a witch queen of Scotland or something. I don't exactly remember. But I will say this. I have a lot of respect for some of the things that Janet has done. Like, she wrote a really powerful book on trans prophecy. I think that The Witch's Bible is influential. When I first looked at it, there are pictures of Wiccan rituals, which they are fully skyclad. So
Right.
it's almost, you
can be influential and problematic at the same time. Like,
yeah,
that
absolutely.
is the whole
Aleister
root of
Crowley,
paganism.
Aleister Crowley, Anton
The twins
LaVey.
from hell, that motherfucker. Like, Bicon,
But
also asshole.
there are very young women, okay, grown adults, but they are what looks to be in their early 20s, standing circled naked with the high priest who looks to be in his 60s or 70s. Like, it is very jarring to see. And I can see how, not accusing Janet in any way. And if this ever were to get back, Janet, I'm not slandering you. But I can see how there could be a huge misuse of power, especially with like young women who are seeking empowerment. And then you have these old men that are like, oh, I can give you power.
See, that is one of my
That's
problems.
scary.
This is an unfortunately all too common experience. This is part of why, like, there are groups that I would, as an adult, maybe have joined if I hadn't dedicated myself to being a solitary. If I hadn't.
Are you really a solitary though?
Not really. Not anymore. Not anymore. I will say that I do practice. My personal practice is my personal practice, but I also share it with my husband. We share a temple, so I'm more of a dual practice right now. But he is initiating into a tradition, and he's oathed in with the heathens, and those are two things that I will never do. Mm-hmm. I will never, partially because I am trying to maintain some sort of neutrality as the president of Metro Valley Pagan Pride, and as long as I'm in that,
very wise of you.
I do not want to. I do not. Even if I joined every group, and I try to go to as many different things as possible, if I joined every group, then there would be another group that would be like, oh, well, she's not one of us.
Yeah, we eat our own, don't we?
A little fucking bit. But not only that, but I think the part of the reason I had started like that, and like, because, you know, the part of the reason that I swore off covens, part of the reason that I had learned to practice magic on my own was because the first coven, our coven leader, our high priestess, was the cool mom, you know, aka contributing to the delinquency of minors. And that is one of those more common experiences. And then another group I joined, it was half serious practitioners that were teaching some really cool shit that I have still carried with me and I think is really cool. And I talk to at least one of those people still this day. And then half, not even a polycule, because a polycule would have at least admitted itself. You know, we'd at least admitted that we're going to sleep with everybody. No, it was just a circle jerk drama.
Yeah, you know, there's a big problem with that. With
bed hopping.
We have, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Ordains. The Ordains were kind of like common witch laws that I think Gardner really popularized, but allegedly are older. But some of the Ordains are things that are still kind of popular today. Different covens will subscribe to different witch laws or Ardanes. For us, so this is not speaking for the entirety of ATW, because there are definitely sexual working partners and sex magic within the tradition. But in our specific group, that's like one of our ordains, is that we don't initiate sexual partners because we are not a fertility group and we are mystery focused. And when you have people that are sharing that sexual relationship between each other, like married couples, for example, far too often I've seen covens being ran by husband and wife or whatever. And if they have shit going on in their marriage,
they bring it right to
the entire coven.
Right. So not only that, but then they will try to open if you have a monogamous relationship and you open that relationship, that is to fix it.
Red flag. Red flag.
Red flag on the play, y'all. Red flag on the play. Don't, and inevitably, the bed hopping begins that we're going to hear about in 20 freaking years. Like, I know some groups, different groups, not even just pagan groups, but different groups where the bed hopping started in the 90s and it caused a rift that is still like present.
Oh yeah, we have that too. We have entire coven lines that are created from that, lineages of covens that have been born because people got divorced or broke up or whatever. Like,
right. Oh my God. Well, that's why there's so many churches.
Yeah.
One preacher decided to start an argument with another, because they, I guess, couldn't be together. That's a problem. Like, if the two of you could just go and spend your happy little lives together, maybe you wouldn't be like splitting the church, but whatever. We've been talking for almost 3 hours now.
I love this. I'm sure you do. I know I need to go and eat and, but I really, really have enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I can have some of these conversations sometimes with other initiates, but also sometimes it can feel a little bit echoey, chambery, because it's like we're all of this tradition. We all share these same X, Y, Z, whatever. And so
also experiencing the same level of oppression, the same level outside irritations, not just oppression.
It's enjoyable to be able to have like actual, let's have critical theory dialogues in a respectful way that actually push us out of our comfort zone to learn and grow and evolve as practitioners. Because like, I feel like there's a lot of people that just are not, they want to act like they're willing to engage in conversations like this, but they're not really, you know?
Well, here's the thing is I think people sometimes will come at something like in good faith, whatever that means. They'll come into the conversation with the intention of presenting their side, but may not be willing to accept somebody else's, and they don't know it until they're hearing that other side. They don't realize, I think, especially when it comes to spirituality, we are intentionally, especially in paganism where you are intentionally, in some ways, programming yourself. We all have some level of programming. And to get in that programming and be willing to tweak the gears and things like that can be difficult. When you're presented with something that does not align with your truth, you have two real directions to go with that. You can incorporate the information and change your belief, or you can reject the information. And that can look anything like shutting down, changing the conversation, or even becoming aggressive. And not triggering those responses is difficult. Even if and it may not even be assuming that it's in some way responsibility of the person who's having this conversation. Like, obviously we've said things to each other that we knew were going to touch a nerve. It was not it was not your responsibility to manage my triggers.
Right. And it's not, I mean, I genuinely have not felt disrespected or triggered in any way. I think that this conversation's been very respectful, and like, I really appreciate you holding this space. Because it's been very, I mean, I've really enjoyed it. I would love to come back. Like, I would love to be able to find more people.
I should come on your show. You know what? If you want to do this again, let me come on your show. How's that?
Yeah, we can do that. Maybe even we can do it live and be real messy.
Oh, girl, you know what? All right, let's do it.
Because imagine.
You know what?
Imagine if some of the discussion that we had tonight, there was a live stream chat watching.
We would definitely need a monitor.
I have some mods for sure.
Definitely let the mods, or just let it go and ignore the fucking chat. Like, that's mine. Like, if we're gonna dip straight into chaos. I'm also a big fan, like, a chaos in the void. That is what I believe in. I believe in the chaos and I believe in the void. The chaos purpose has no purpose other than to fill the void.
I think if you continue to read my Witchflight book, you are going to, when it gets to like the virtues specifically, I think you'll probably be like, oh.
Right.
because I talk about the void. I talk about light, darkness, chaos, order, void. And then the third book, there's even more virtues. So I would say I'm maybe even, some people might even describe me as like a little discriminatory about the void.
Really?
Hmm. You'll have to read about it.
Okay. Well, definitely, we'll do the next show on your channel.
I'd be down to host you. Absolutely.
All right. So we've gone on for 3 hours, and assuming that, like, because I do realize that at some point this stopped being a conversation for this third being in the room, this great eye of the YouTube, we forgot about you. So it's just like very, very there right now. But so if you are still watching and you have enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Send me money. I am broke. And also check out Jasmyne's books and all the social media stuff. Check me out on my website, dottieThepsychic.com. Is there anything you'd like to add to speak to the crowd?
No, I think I really feel like we've covered a lot. I hope that also everyone like at home watching, like if you've made it this far, props to you, babe. Like put us like hopefully you put us on as a podcast and got some stuff done. And
hopefully you didn't drop
made it
too many times. Like I hope you didn't lost to a cup or two because this got deep.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, like comment down below and in your comment include something and use the word star, but in your comment, use that word so that way we know that you made it all the way to the end, just because I always like to know who's watching all the way through. So thank you again for hosting me. I will gladly host you. And yeah, this was great. Blessed be.
Right. Well, y'all, thank you for sticking around. I am officially out of words, so thank you very much. And, of course, safe travel and much profit to you. Thank you for joining me at Madame Tortuga's Lounge. In case you didn't know, I am actually a full-time professional psychic with another YouTube channel. I'm also part of Metro Valley Pagan Pride, and if you'd like to learn about all of those things, you can find out more at dottieThepsychic.com. That's dottieThepsychic.com. Safe travel and much profit to you.